Chapter 1444, Soul Offering Ceremony. The wasteland continent was, originally, an uninhabitable sea of sand. The climate of the continent was extremely arid, and the environment was horrible. There were very few signs of life. However, after the 100 races suffered defeat and were chased from the beast god continent by the magical beasts, they moved to this desert, finally leading to a prosperous age of life in a land where resources were heavily depleted. Over the million years that the 100 races had spent on the wasteland continent, it had been modified countless times. However, due to its natural climate, they were unable to change the wasteland continent into a green oasis that was brimming with life even after several experts had poured their hearts out. As a result, greenery was extremely scarce on the continent. From afar, there seemed to be no other colors aside from the deep blue sky and endless stretches of yellow sand. At this moment, a smear of violet suddenly appeared on the distant horizon. It silently shot through the air at an unbelievable speed, disappearing into the distance in a single moment. Jianshan rode a sword within the violet light as he made his way to the center of the continent. Jianshan had learned where the War God Mountain was located long ago, so he did not stop at all on his journey, heading directly to the hall on the Ziying sword. He understood that if he wanted to find Tai Ta here, he just needed to proceed to the sacred mountain of the 100 races, War God Mountain. Jianshan had already closed his eyes on the Ziying sword. The sword moved just far too quickly, so the surrounding landscape was reduced to a blur. It was impossible to distinguish the surroundings with his eyes, so he used his soul to travel. However, Jianshan's face changed at this very moment. He immediately came to a halt as his eyes snapped open. They glowed, as if they could pierce through space and allow him to see what was going on in an extremely distant place. A speck of green light suddenly appeared in the distance. It bloomed like a flower, a tiny speck that became bright and resplendent. Very soon, the green light illuminated half the sky, dyeing it a deep green. Within it hid an extremely terrifying life force. It's the Elven Godtree. Jianshan became fixated on the green as he stood on the Ziying sword. The light in his eyes flickered as surprise and doubt appeared on his face. This tree appeared in the battle against the world of Forsaken Saints before. However, it was only a small clipping back then. Looks like this is the true form of the tree. However, its terrifying life force even shocks me. Looks like this tree isn't as simple as it's rumored to be, Jianshan thought. He had heard some rumors regarding the Elven God Tree. He did not know much about it, but he had learned from the rumors that the tree was recorded to only be on the level of a saint emperor. Now that he saw it today, his initial understanding was completely thrown out. Jianshan stared at the green light, which lit up half the sky, for a while before continuing on as a streak of light. Where the green light has appeared just happens to be the War God Mountain. I wonder what's happened there, Jianshan thought as he sped up slightly. As he approached the mountain, he entered the boundary of the green light. The green light invaded the violet light around him and came in contact with his body, immediately filling him with a comfortable feeling. At that moment, Jianshan even felt like his lifespan was increasing. What shocked Jianshan even more was that he still felt like his lifespan was increasing even though he had become a saint emperor and possessed the battle prowess of someone in the origin realm. This filled him with disbelief. Jianshan swept over the land below with his soul and actually discovered specks of light in the dry, yellow sand. They were strands of grass sprouts, having appeared out of nowhere. They grew in the sand and gradually enveloped the land before rapidly growing at a visible rate. In just a minute, they had become several inches tall. In the blink of an eye, the expanse of sand had vanished from the area enveloped by the green light. The sand was replaced by green grass teeming with life. Jianshan's soul enveloped an area of 200,000 kilometers. There were several cities and tribes of various sizes within his senses. However, regardless of their strength, they currently all knelt on their knees and bowed to the mountain. Their faces were filled with devotion. Jianshan remained silent. He gazed into the distance and rapidly flew closer to the War God Mountain. He could vaguely see an ancient tree that was several thousand meters tall standing there. It was shining with a resplendent light as it reached out in all directions. It enveloped quite a portion of the continent. Its tremendous life force even made it difficult for Jianshan to keep his composure. Jianshan finally arrived outside War God Mountain. However, the mountain was currently enveloped by a barrier, and the barrier made it impossible to see what was going on inside. The Elven Godtree had taken root at the bottom of the barrier. One of its branches reached into the barrier and into the War God Hall on the peak of the mountain. However, the tree was not actually present. It was only an illusion, created by several branches. Each branch was several hundred meters long. Who has come? A great cry rang out the moment Jianshan approached the War God Mountain. With the voice, the space 100 meters around Jianshan instantly froze. Several auras that came from Saint Emperors descended upon him at the same time. Jianshan was not affected at all. His gaze remained fixated on the mountain as the light in his eyes flickered. The space 100 meters above Jianshan gently pulsed and a few figures silently appeared. Every single one of them gave off a tremendous presence. They were all Saint Emperors, and they were glaring at Jianshan. They were all experts of the 100 races. Jianshan was familiar with them. He had seen many of them in the previous battle against the world of Forsaken Saints. They were the few Saint Kings that had managed to survive the battle, but they had all become Saint Emperors now. Jianshan. The Saint Emperors recognized Jianshan as well and were immediately surprised. Without any hesitation, they immediately recalled their presences and the space around Jianshan returned to normal. It's Sovereign Jianshan. We didn't know Sovereign Jianshan had come, so if we have offended you, please forgive us. The Saint Emperors immediately became respectful and spoke with some gratitude. They all understood that they had become Saint Emperors because of their war god's assistance and the human sovereign's gifts. Tai Ta and Jianshan's friendship was no secret among the 4 races. All of them had witnessed Tai Ta go to the Tianyuan continent to ask Jianshan for the heavenly resources. This matter had obviously reached the ears of the experts as well. What's happening on War God Mountain? And what's happening with my brother, Tai Ta? Jianshan asked as he stared at the barrier in front of him. The barrier had been cast by around a dozen Saint Emperors. It concealed everything that was inside. Jianshan's soul was unable to penetrate it, unless he removed the barrier. Esteemed sovereign of the humans, the war god is currently undergoing a soul offering ceremony. This ceremony is extremely important to the war god. We cannot afford to have anything go wrong. In order for it to be successful, we cast this barrier to lock down the mountain after gaining the war god's approval, replied a Saint Emperor of the 100 races. It was an old woman with green fire flickering in her eyes. She was the Saint Emperor of the Flame Demons. I want you to open the barrier. I'm here, so there's no need to worry about safety. Unless an Origin Realm expert comes personally, no one will be able to approach this place, Jianshan said without leaving any room for disagreement. The barrier hid everything inside. It was impossible to find out what was going on from the outside. He found this worrying. The Saint Emperors hesitated. They seemed troubled. A cold light flashed through Jianshan's eyes. He coldly said, if you don't open the barrier, I can only do so myself. Helpless, the Saint Emperors could only remove the barrier around the mountain. As soon as the barrier vanished, a tremendous pulse of energy along with a resplendent golden light appeared. The War God Hall at the very peak of the mountain let out a bright light, mixing with the green light from the Elven Godtree. The light illuminated the entire region and dyed the whole mountain golden. Countless people sat close to one another on the mountain, covering every inch of the land. All of them had their eyes closed while their faces were filled with devotion. They used a secret technique to condense a sliver of their soul, allowing it to drift out of the top of their heads. An illusionary branch of the Elven Godtree revolved around the top of the mountain. It used the branch to draw a profound formation, connecting everyone's soul together. After being refined by the formation, the souls turned into a wondrous energy that was channeled into the War God Hall. Jianshan looked around before resting his gaze on the divine hall at the very top. He became rather stern. He felt that the divine hall was even more powerful than the beast god hall that belonged to the magical beasts. This unsettled him. Why is your soul offering ceremony so strange, where it needs the souls of so many people? Jianshan asked in a deep voice. He could now see what was going on, but he was unable to tell whether it was beneficial or detrimental to Tai Ta. The soul offering ceremony has been passed down through the ancient records in the War God Hall. The records say that our war god must undergo this procedure, but we don't know the exact reason, said an Elven Saint Emperor. She was a beautiful woman who seemed only to be in her 20s. A pair of wings sat on her back, and she seemed to be divine. Chapter 1445. The Elven Godtree. Jian Chen frowned as he slowly glanced over all the people present. His gaze stopped on the figure of the Elven Godtree for some time before he looked at the formation drawn by the illusionary branch. The formation had connected all the soul fragments from the people on the mountain and was channeling it into the War God Hall as a wondrous type of energy. However, Jian Chen was unsure as to what was going on in the War God Hall. He could clearly sense that the War God Hall was even more powerful than the Beast God Hall. His soul could not penetrate. Jian Chen stared at the bright divine hall for a while before a sliver of determination appeared in his eyes. With a single movement, he headed toward it. The door to the divine hall was not closed. Jian Chen was slightly worried about Tai Ta, so he wanted to enter to check on him. Although the war god of the 100 races possessed the faith of the entire race, this ceremony was just far too odd. The entire process was being directed by a mysterious, ancient tree, so Jian Chen had to take precautions. After all, something like this had happened to the White Tiger in the past as well. Sovereign Jian Chen, do not approach the War God Hall, the Saint Emperors all cried out as they rapidly ran toward Jian Chen. They wanted to stop him. However, Jian Chen had already arrived before the War God Hall. He was so fast that even the Saint Emperors were not able to catch up to him. Sovereign Jian Chen, not only will the war gods suffer severe losses if the ceremony is disturbed, but even the 990,000 people on the mountain will suffer a great backlash, which would be almost irrecoverable. Seeing how they could not catch up to the Jian Chen, the Saint Emperor sent him a message through a technique as quickly as they could. Worry filled their faces. Jian Chen paused, and after a slight moment of hesitation, he made his way to the door. The divine hall gave Jian Chen an impression that it was extremely powerful, but the more powerful something was, the more difficult it was to control. He believed that no one present could control the divine hall, so they obviously could not use its power. The moment Jian Chen headed toward the entrance, the Elven Godtree suddenly moved. With a flash of green light, a branch that was several meters thick blocked the entrance. The branch was illusionary and completely condensed from tremendous life force, but it stopped Jian Chen in his steps. A gleam of light flickered through Jian Chen's eyes, and he suddenly turned toward the Elven Godtree that extended into the sky. His gaze gradually sharpened, as if he wanted to see through the tree. This king knows that you are worried about the safety of the war god. Do not worry, the war god's status among us, the god race, is not something you can imagine. We would never do something detrimental to the war god. An obscure voice rang through Jian Chen's head. It came from a female, and it was gentle but dignified. Jian Chen became stern in a single moment. He expanded his soul in all directions and became filled with caution. He did not know where the voice came from at all. Are you the one talking to me? Jian Chen asked gruffly as he stared at the figure of the Elven Godtree nearby. This ceremony is extremely important to the war god. Nothing can go wrong. Before the ceremony ends, do not enter the War God Hall, or you will end up injuring the war god instead of helping him. The obscure voice appeared again. Jian Chen was still unable to find its origins. As soon as the voice finished speaking, the ancient branch at the entrance of the Divine Hall was removed. Jian Chen did not try to enter the Divine Hall any longer. Instead, he stood there as he stared at the Elven Godtree. He was certain that even if the speaker was not the tree, they were still closely connected to it. Who are you? Are you the spirit of the Elven Godtree? Jian Chen asked again. He was very perturbed. He had never thought that such a grand existence hid among the 100 races. It was impossible for her to be a Saint Emperor, since just being able to communicate to him without revealing her position was not something Saint Emperors could do. 3 days later, the ceremony will end. Before then, I hope you will not disturb the ceremony, just in case you cause it to fail. The voice rang out again and completely ignored Jian Chen's questions. "All right. I'll wait here patiently for 3 days," responded Jian Chen before he left the War God Mountain. He waited patiently, hovering away from the mountain, but his gaze was fixed on the ancient tree the entire time. The Saint Emperors who did not take part in the ceremony all looked around with uncertainty. Doubt filled their eyes. One of them could not hold back their curiosity and asked politely, "Sovereign Jian Chen, may I ask who you were talking to? Is there a mysterious expert that we cannot sense here?" Jian Chen remained silent. He understood that the obscure voice was probably only audible to him. 3 days later, the 990,000 people opened their eyes. Their faces were pale and haggard. They seemed extremely weak, but they were all filled with emotion. The gazes they directed at the War God Hall were filled with respect that came from the bottom of their hearts. The figure of the Elven Godtree disappeared, returning to a branch that was stabbed into the ground. It was carefully collected by the Elven Saint Emperor. The force of life in the surroundings disappeared with the figure of the tree. The formation had completely vanished, leaving only the War God Hall shining as bright as it had been before, rivaling the sun. The vegetation that had grown on a small part of the continent, because of the teeming life force of the Elven God Tree, began to wither after it lost its source of life. The vegetation would soon be reduced to dead grass. Looks like the ceremony was successful. The ancient method in the records is right. The Saint Emperors of the 100 races all expressed their joy. The ancient method originated from the War God Hall and, after the countless years it had been around, this was only the second time it had been used. The branch that had conjured the Elven God Tree had been examined countless times by Jian Chen's soul before it was collected by the Elven Saint Emperor. It's an ordinary branch. There's no other secret to it aside from its terrifying life force, Jian Chen thought. He could not help but think about where the Elven God Tree actually was. At this moment, a terrifying presence radiated from the War God Hall. Tai Ta emerged from the Divine Hall with long strides. He let out a lustrous light and stood 3 meters tall. His bearing was very dignified. Jian Chen looked at Tai Ta and smiled from the inside. He knew that his friend had truly grown. This growth was not an increase in strength or age but in temperament. We welcome the War God's emergence. All the people on the War God Mountain, including the Saint Emperors, kneeled and bowed to Tai Ta. Their faces were filled with reverence from the bottom of their hearts, as if they were welcoming a god. Tai Ta seemed to ignore their kneeling. He looked at Jian Chen. One of them stood outside the Divine Hall while the other stood beyond the outskirts of the mountain. They stared at one another. A few seconds later, Tai Ta took a step and arrived before Jian Chen instantly. He patted Jian Chen's shoulder heavily and smiled. "Jian Chen, I never thought that you would come to the Wasteland continent to look for me so soon. I was undergoing the soul offering ceremony a few days ago and was cut off from the outside world, so I've made you wait." Tai Ta's strength was very great. If Jian Chen was not in possession of the chaotic body and was not so powerful, he probably would have struggled to endure Tai Ta's force. "Your ceremony is very strange, actually requiring the souls of so many people. I was worried about you and almost charged into the Divine Hall." "It's good seeing you fine now," Jian Chen smiled faintly. "The ceremony is very strange. However, this ceremony has been passed down since the ancient times. It condenses the souls of 990,000 people to create the soul of the axe of the warring gods. The previous war god, Uncle Ergens, experienced this ceremony as well," said Tai Ta. Afterward, the axe imprint on his forehead began to shine, and a small golden axe flew out, turning into an awe-inspiring war axe in Tai Ta's hands. "I learned after coming to the 100 races that the weapon in my hand can only display its greatest power when its form is fused with its soul. The axe I used before was only composed of the form and not the soul. The ceremony I just went through was to condense the soul of the axe, fusing the form with the soul," Tai Ta said as he stared at the golden axe in his hands. Jian Chen looked at the axe and could clearly feel its changes. The axe seemed like an inanimate object that had gained life. The pressure radiating from the axe became even more effective on the soul. Jian Shen, let's go and catch up properly in the War God Hall. Tai Ta put the axe away and pulled Jian Shen into the War God Hall. No outsider had ever set foot in the War God Hall in countless years. Jian Shen was the first. The two of them spoke for a very long time in the War God Hall. As soon as they thought about how they had used to be students in Kargath Academy but had now become sovereign-like figures to entire races, they both sighed emotionally. Tai Ta, can I ask you how much you know about the Elven Godtree? Jian Shen suddenly asked a question and looked at Tai Ta with interest. Tai Ta thought about the question seriously and said, I've only come to the 100 races recently, so I only have a rough understanding of each race. However, I do know some things regarding the Elven Godtree. It's said that the tree has already existed for an extremely long time. When the 100 races still resided on the Beast God continent, before Uncle Ergens had been born, the Elven Godtree was there. It's always represented the elves. After we were defeated, the Elven Godtree was moved from the Beast God continent to the Wasteland continent with us, changing the territory of the elves into a great, lush forest. It uses its own life force to nourish the land, and it's never withered after so many years. There's even a rumor that the Elven Godtree cannot be destroyed. No matter how heavily damaged it becomes, it can completely recover in an instant. Chapter 1446. The Elven God King Jian Shen remained silent because of what Tai Ta had told him. He gently frowned and sank into his thoughts. His mind was filled with matters regarding the Elven Godtree. A tree that had lived for over 1,000,000 years and was even more ancient than the 4 champions from the ancient times was no longer an ordinary tree, especially with its abnormal movements during the soul offering ceremony. Coupled with the obscure voice of unknown origins, it made Jian Shen feel that the tree was not as simple as it seemed. Then where did that obscure voice come from? Has the Elven Godtree gained self-consciousness, or is it someone else? Jian Shen wondered. In the past, the 100 races had been the only great race that had not possessed a Saint Emperor, but now that Jian Shen had personally come to the Wasteland continent, he found that they were not as simple as people had imagined them to be. There was actually a mysterious existence, who even he himself was unable to detect, hidden on this barren continent. No one knew who they were since they had never been detected by others. Jian Shen, the Elven Godtree has a very powerful life force, but its battle prowess is just far too limited. It's only at the level of a Saint Emperor, so it won't be of great use. After we were defeated in the ancient times and the Elven Godtree was moved from the Beast God continent to the Wasteland continent, it's never moved again, Tai Ta said with a deep, muffled voice. He thought that Jian Shen wanted to ask if the tree could be moved to the Tianyuan continent for the next major battle after Jian Shen had witnessed how extraordinary it was in battle. Jian Shen gently shook his head. Tai Ta, I feel like this tree is not as simple as you all think it is. There is definitely an even greater mystery behind it. I plan to visit the territory of the elves to properly examine the Godtree. Tai Ta immediately stood up when he heard that and said, Jian Shen, I'll come with you. Jian Shen and Tai Ta left the War God Hall together and made their way to the territory of the elves. An elven expert followed them, but they were not a Saint Emperor, only a Saint King. Along the way, the Saint King enthusiastically explained the situation of the elves to Jian Shen and Tai Ta. Jian Shen gained a rough understanding of the elves. The territory of the elves was only several 100,000 kilometers away from the War God Mountain. When their race had first moved there, the place was still a desert, devoid of any life. Any type of vegetation struggled to survive. After the Elven Godtree took root and used its own tremendous life force to nourish the desert, the quality of the soul changed. Only then could a forest grow on the Wasteland continent. Ancient trees that were several 100 meters tall could be seen everywhere. The entire forest was filled with life, and the vegetation was countless times more dense than any mountain on the Tianyuan continent. Soon after Jian Shen and Tai Ta had entered the territory of the elves, the elven experts received the news. The Saint Emperor that Jian Shen had met outside the War God Hall led around a dozen Saint Kings to welcome and receive them. The Elven Queen, Juligia the 33rd, welcomes the great War God and the esteemed human sovereign. The female Saint Emperor and the Saint Kings behind her all bowed to Jian Shen and Tai Ta. Elven Queen, we've come this time with the intention of seeing the ancient tree of your esteemed race that has existed since ancient times. Would that be inconvenient for you? Jian cut right to the chase and expressed their reason for coming. The Elven Queen hesitated slightly before allowing Jian to visit the Elven Godtree. She knew very well that she could not object at all. Even ignoring Jian strength and status, just the war god standing beside him sucked away her courage to decline. Afterward, the Elven Queen personally led the way. She took Tai Ta and Jian to the land where the Elven Godtree had taken root. Along the way, Jian discovered quite a few elves dancing about through the forest and fluttering their wings. The males were handsome while the females were pretty. Pure smiles filled their faces. They seemed naive and lively. Several holes existed on some huge trees. That was where the elves stayed as well as where they cultivated. Because of their cultivation method, the holes did not harm the trees at all and would even hasten their growth, allowing them to become even taller and thicker. Jian and Tai Ta walked several thousand kilometers, following the Elven Queen's lead. They entered the central region of the forest. Although the region was teeming with life, it was silent. There was not a single person visible as far as the eye could see. This is the forbidden region of us elves. Without the agreement of the Elven Queen, even the elders of our race cannot set foot here. This is because this is the place where our Godtree has taken root. The Elven Godtree possesses an extremely venerated status within our territory, even though it's just a tree, the Elven Queen said with a solemn voice. Is this really just a tree? Jian thought. He raised his head and looked ahead. Several dozen kilometers away, he saw a great tree that glowed with faint green light. Even though it was only several hundred meters tall, it greatly differed from the projections he had seen before. However, he could still tell with a single glance that it was the Elven Godtree. In Jian eyes, the Elven Godtree seemed no different than any other tree, aside from its green glow. It was very difficult to see the awe it had displayed on the battle against the foreign world and outside War God Mountain. However, as his soul approached the tree, it was stopped 100 meters away by a mysterious force, preventing it from getting any closer. Jian raised his head to observe the ancient tree and slowly made his way over. In the end, he stopped 100 meters away from the Elven Godtree and closely examined it. It seems ordinary on the outside, just like any other tree, but a terrifyingly tremendous life force is hidden inside. This life force is so powerful that even I feel shocked. It's a tree, yet it's reached a state where it seems the same as its origin form. This is just amazing, Jian softly said as he studied the tree. It seemed like he was just talking to himself. This mysterious Elven Godtree can fool the entire 100 races, but it cannot fool me. I have come to personally see you. I know you can hear me talking, so do you still plan on hiding? Jian spoke to the tree. Tai Ta and the Elven Queen both suspiciously stared at Jian. They felt that Jian was saying something odd. Sigh. Suddenly, a sigh rang through Jian head, but he was unable to tell where it had come from at all. Come in. The obscure, female voice rang in Jian head once again. A human-sized hole suddenly appeared in the tree in front of him. The Elven Queen's eyes immediately narrowed. Shock filled her face. The Elven Godtree had always just been a tree with a supreme status throughout the history of the elves. Nothing like this had ever happened before. Without any hesitation, Jian strode over. Just when Tai Ta and the Elven Queen behind him wanted to follow him in, they were stopped 100 meters away by a mysterious force. The force was extremely strange, and even Tai Ta was unable to overcome it. Jian entered the hole in the tree and immediately disappeared. The tree returned to how it was before. There were no signs of what had just happened. Jian arrived in a green space. It was empty, like a miniature world, but filled with the presence of life. Jian stood in the center of the space. You sure are worthy of being known as the greatest human expert to reach such a level of cultivation within just a few decades and to discover this king's existence. Even in the saints' world, your talent belongs to the very top. The obscure voice rang through the space. It was gentle and pleasant but also dignified. That's the second time you've referred to yourself as a king. You shouldn't be a tree if you refer to yourself like that. If I've guessed correctly, you shouldn't be a tree at all. I'm very curious, and I also want to know a lot as to who you are. Jian Chen inquired. However, he was not as calm as he seemed on the surface. His heart churned. The voice that had just referred to herself as a king actually knew about the existence of the saints' world. Did that mean she was an expert from the saints' world? With your talent, you'll surpass me sooner or later, or even end up leaving me in the dust. As a result, you have the right to know some things. This king is Adriana, the strongest god king of the god race. I have come under the orders of my race's hall elders, descending here over 3 million years ago to welcome the return of the war god. Chapter 1447, Experts of the God King's Throne. Jian Chen's eyes immediately widened as disbelief filled his face. His heart surged even more, and he almost lost all composure. He had even begun to doubt his ears at that moment. A God King. The owner of the obscure voice was actually a God King. This was just far too astounding. Jian Chen had learned from the sword spirits long ago that beyond the origin realm was godhood. Godhood was split into another 4 cultivation levels, which were deity, god, over-god, and God King. God King was the peak of godhood, and one more step would lead to the highest realm of cultivation in the saints' world, the primordial realm. Adriana was the strongest God King among the god race of the saints' world. That would mean that even among the God Kings, her strength was ranked near the top. Jian Chen was extremely shocked, struggling to return to his senses even after quite some time. A God King was actually hidden among the 100 races and had never been discovered over the countless years. This was just far too shocking, far too astounding. Jian Chen finally began to recover after a long time. He sucked in a deep breath and stared at the empty, green space with some lingering shock. He asked, Senior, Junior doesn't understand something. You said that you came under the orders of the hall elders to welcome the war god. Why did you not interfere when the previous war god, Ergens, was slain by the winged tiger god? With your strength as a God King, protecting the previous war god would have been extremely easy, wouldn't it? Sigh, Adriana deeply exhaled as her voice became bitter. She said, I've already lost that ability. I may be the greatest God King of the God race, but I'm only a weak soul now. After being weak for countless years, I need to sleep and nourish my soul so it doesn't disperse. Jian Chen understood. The 100 races had a God King, yet she had never been discovered after so many years and had never acted either because Adriana was only a fragile soul now. Even if she wanted to do something, she did not have the power. Senior, you're a God King. You're already invincible here, so may I ask how you ended up like this? Did something go wrong during the process of coming down, or was it some other reason? Jian Chen carefully asked. I'm not the only God King in this world. The God King of the Ice Goddess Hall, Shui Yunlan, came down as well. I arrived several thousand years before Shui Yunlan, but she went overboard when she came down. As soon as she came down, she sealed up this world. Not only did she seal up the tunnel to the saints' world, she stopped everyone from being able to reach the origin realm. Even the god race saint emperors who followed me to this lower world were affected, preventing them from reaching the origin realm. For this, I engaged in a great battle against her. Unfortunately, our difference in strength was extremely great even though I was the greatest God King of the God race. I was not her opponent, so I was slain by her in the end. Shui Yunlan wiped out my body and heavily injured my soul, making it extremely difficult to recover. The teeming life force within my body turned into this tree of life to nourish my weakened soul so that it would not disperse. However, Shui Yunlan would never dare to kill me off. Once I die, the hall elders in the higher world would immediately know what had happened. Jian Chen's heart beat heavily. He could not help but think about Protector Shui. He sighed in surprise, is Protector Shui really that strong? You're both God Kings, but you're still not her opponent even as the greatest God King of the God race? Shui Yunlan has already arrived at the very peak of Godking. There is a God King's throne in the Saints' world that records 1,000 of the most powerful God Kings in the entire Saints' world. Shui Yunlan's ranking is 9th. There are only a few God Kings who have surpassed her in the entire Saints' world. I only rank in the top 100. Her strength is not something you can imagine, Adriana gently sighed. Jian Chen gasped. Only now did he understand just how terrifying Protector Shui was, the same person who was always polite to his sister. There were many God Kings in the vast Saints' world, yet Protector Shui ranked 9th among all of them. This was a great surprise to Jian Chen. And that was what happened over 3 million years ago. Although Shui Yunlan's strength has not been able to progress during the 3 million years she's stayed here, much less make a breakthrough, she's become even more powerful now, Adriana's voice rang out. It was filled with bitterness. Although she had stayed in the lower world with Shui Yunlan for over 3 million years, Shui Yunlan's strength had increased while she was only a weak soul right now. Even recovering her strength was just an extravagant wish, let alone making any improvements. You can only rely on yourself to fend off the threat of the foreign world. I am unable to help you. I am also a God King that's come down from a higher world, so I can't interfere with too many matters regarding this world, or I will be punished by the laws of the world. The treasure that the Hall Elders bestowed upon me to fend off the punishment of the laws was destroyed in the battle against Shui Yunlan. I can already sense that Shui Yunlan has found the snow goddess of the ice goddess Hall. Soon, Shui Yunlan will leave with her. At that time, the seal of this world will shatter and the tunnel to the Saints' world will open again. The formation that restricts everyone from reaching the origin realm will vanish as well. At that time, you'll be able to reach the Saints' world. At the same time, since you're friends with the War God, I hope you can pass on my message. He cannot take revenge for the previous War God before he has truly become powerful. That winged tiger god from 1,000,000 years ago is not as simple as he seemed. Even though he only displayed strength of someone from the origin realm, he makes my heart jump. Even if he's not as powerful as me, he is definitely in possession of a treasure that can heavily injure me. I also get the same feeling from the human Mo Tianyun. I have become extremely exhausted after assisting the War God undergo the soul offering ceremony, so I am about to fall into a slumber again. Do not expose my existence. When the winged tiger god slayed the previous War God, he sealed up his corpse and shed 18 pieces of fur. Those pieces are the only key to the seal of the War God, and opening the seal will allow the current War God to obtain the essence and power of the previous War God. Chapter 1448, Changes to the Saint Artifact. When Jian Chen emerged from the Elven Godtree, Adriana sank into a slumber. The soul offering ceremony that Tai Ta had gone through had been secretly directed by Adriana. She had expended a great deal of energy, so she needed to fall asleep since she no longer possessed her strength as a God King. Jian Chen stood 100 meters away as he stared at the Elven Godtree that let out a faint, green glow. His emotions were extremely mixed. He now knew that the Elven Godtree before him was not a tree but a God King. Jian Chen, what happened? Tai Ta asked Jian Chen out of doubt as he stood beside him. He had no idea what had happened within the Elven Godtree. The Elven Queen stared fixedly at Jian Chen as well while she stood beside Tai Ta. She wanted to know the answer to that question very much. The Elven Godtree had existed among the elves for so long, yet something like this had never happened before. It had never let someone into its main trunk. Jian Chen said nothing. He gazed at the tree before bowing. He said, "This is a God King's tree." Afterward, he turned around and left. Tai Ta scratched his head in confusion. He glanced at the tree suspiciously a few times before silently leaving with Jian Chen. A God King's tree? What is Sovereign Jian Chen trying to say? The Elven Queen stood there in a daze. She closely observed the Elven God Tree while confusion filled her face. Although she did not understand what Jian Chen meant by God King's tree, she understood that the Elven God Tree was probably not as simple as her predecessors had understood it to be. Otherwise, how could it have been worthy of receiving a bow from the human sovereign? However, what Jian Chen did not know was that soon after he had left, the bow he gave to the Elven Godtree was recorded in the archives of the race. At the same time, the Godking's tree he had mentioned was clearly recorded as well. Tai Ta and Jianshan left the only forest on the wasteland continent after visiting the elves. Along the way, Jianshan also asked Tai Ta about the matter regarding the keys to Ergin's corpse, the beast furs. The Hall elders of the War God Hall have reported that they've already gathered 11 of the 18 beast furs. There's just 7 left that they haven't obtained. 2 of them are with the Beast God Hall on the Beast God continent, 1 is with Mercenary City on the Tian Yuan continent, 1 is with the Tyrant's Blade School of the Protector clans, and the whereabouts of the last 3 are unknown, said Tai Ta. Jianshan thought of something. With a flip of his hand, 3 palm-sized beast furs immediately appeared. These beast furs were once crucial for his breakthrough to sainthood. He had given the 3 beast fur to others to cultivate with but had taken them soon after back. Tai Ta, I just happen to have 3 beast furs. These must be the 3 with unknown whereabouts. I'll give them to you right now. I'll help you find the other beast furs as well, said Jianshan before passing his 3 beast furs to Tai Ta. There was obviously no need to be polite since Tai Ta and Jianshan were close, so Tai Ta accepted the 3 beast furs. At this time, Jianshan's face suddenly changed. A golden stream of light immediately shot from his forehead, turning into a fist-sized golden tower before him. Tai Ta, I need to enter the artifact space, so I'll leave it with you for now. Jianshan hurried into the artifact space before Tai Ta could ask why. A white-robed, middle-aged man currently stood in a majestic hall within the artifact space. He sternly stared ahead. He was the artifact spirit of the artifact space. An extremely powerful but not very large formation shone with resplendent light, illuminating the hall in front of the artifact spirit. To no surprise, the Radiant Saint Force origin energy refined by the artifact was all stored within the formation. The origin energy of Radiant Saint Force was crucial for allowing Radiant Saint Masters to go from Class 6 to 7 and from Class 7 to 8. However, the world did not possess any by itself. The reason why the Saint artifact existed was to absorb the Radiant Saint Force in the world and transform it into origin energy. The seal within the artifact space had existed for an extremely long time, so long that it had been there before the artifact spirit was born. At the same time, it was the only place in the artifact space that the artifact spirit could not control. Over the countless years the Saint artifact had existed, the amount of origin energy it had stored up had already reached a terrifying point. However, the seal would only weaken once every 50 years, and every time it weakened, only a bare minimum of the origin energy would escape, allowing people to take it away and thus giving birth to Class 7 Radiant Saint Masters on the Tian Yuan continent. At this moment, a violet streak of light shot over with lightning-like speed. It vanished into the hall. Jianshan had made his way over as quickly as he could once he received the news from the artifact spirit. As soon as Jianshan arrived, his gaze was drawn to the powerful seal. He immediately frowned because the seal that held in all the origin energy was extremely unstable. It showed signs of shattering. Greetings to the master. The artifact spirit greeted Jianshan with a bow. Jianshan stared at the seal and asked, Artifact spirit, what's happening here? Master, I am not too sure as to what the exact situation is, because I only just discovered the abnormality of the seal. However, according to my close observations, I have found that a foreign force appeared at a certain time within the seal. Even though there is only a sliver of it, it is so powerful that it makes me shiver. It's currently eating away the seal bit by bit, responded the artifact spirit. Jianshan narrowed his eyes and stared at the seal. Indeed, he discovered the foreign force that did not belong to the seal, as described by the artifact spirit. After a moment of observation, he suddenly became extremely stern. There was only just a sliver of the foreign force, but Jianshan sensed it as a fatal threat. Just how did this foreign force appear? Jianshan thought as the light in his eyes flickered with uncertainty. He thought about Adriana, but he quickly shook his head. This force clearly did not match Adriana's power and he could not think of a reason why she would want to help him. Master, the seal is slowly being eaten away by the energy. If this continues, the seal will completely collapse in just a few days. If the seal is unable to keep it busy and if the foreign force erupts in the Saint Artifact, the outcome will be, the artifact spirit said with a heavy voice as his complexion became horrendous. The Saint Artifact could only resist attacks from Saint Emperors, and a few more powerful Saint Emperors would have been enough to destroy it, let alone the foreign force that surpassed Saint Emperor. Once the Saint Artifact was destroyed, he would disperse as well. Chapter 1449, Collecting the Beast Furs. Jian Chen's complexion became ugly. He worried that it really would turn out like what the artifact spirit had said, where once the foreign force was free from the seal, it would explode and obliterate the Saint Artifact. Not only would the Saint Artifact be destroyed, but the artifact spirit would disperse as well, dying. The artifact spirit was inseparable from the Saint Artifact. It had been born in the artifact space. They mutually coexisted. Of course, this was true unless he was as powerful as the sword spirits, who could continue to exist even after the artifacts they belonged to were destroyed. Quite a lot of the seal has been destroyed already. Looks like this foreign force has already been here for quite some time, Jian Chen said with a gruff voice. What he wanted to understand the most was just where did this foreign force come from? It's a pity that I can't control everything here and only just discovered the abnormal pulses of energy from this seal as well as the abnormality here. The artifact spirit gently sighed and felt bitter. Jian Chen and the artifact spirit stood there as they stared at the seal. They thought about methods to deal with it in an attempt to remove the foreign force before it could erupt after it completely ate away the seal. Unfortunately, the two of them could only sigh after racking their brains. There was nothing they could do to the foreign force. Although there was only a sliver of this foreign force, it was extremely powerful. Jian Chen was not confident he could disperse it even if he erupted with his full battle prowess, which was equivalent to the origin realm. At the same time, the Saint Artifact was unable to withstand the power of the origin realm. If Jian Chen really did display his full strength, the Saint Artifact probably would collapse before he could even launch an attack on the foreign force. This foreign force is eating away at the seal bit by bit in an extremely gentle method. Not only is it able to destroy the seal, but it probably won't harm the Saint Artifact either. Looks like this force is harmless for now, or why would it go to such great lengths with its power if it wanted to destroy the Saint Artifact? Jian Chen pondered silently. However, he was still unsure whether the force would destroy the Saint Artifact in the end or not. Jian Chen left the artifact spirit there to closely observe any changes to the seal. He then left the artifact space. When he emerged, he learned that Tai Ta had already taken the Saint Artifact with him back to the War God Hall. In the War God Hall, Jian Chen got Tai Ta to summon many Hall Elders and learned about the current force of the 100 races as well as all the trump cards they had on hand. He needed this information so that he could make preparations to fend off the next wave of the invasion. He had come to the 100 races this time to see Tai Ta as well as to truly understand all the trump cards that the 100 races possessed. No one understood the 100 races better than the Hall Elders of the War God Hall. Even Tai Ta did not know as much as them since he had only just arrived. If it was before the invasion, the 100 races would definitely find this request outrageous if Jian Chen had come as a human to investigate the 100 races. Even if he was the human sovereign, the Hall Elders would not tell him anything. Yet the Hall Elders told Jian Chen everything he wanted to know right now. This was because they too understood that the threat of the foreign world was just far too great. If the four races did not work together, they would not be able to stop the foreign world, which would lead to their extinction. However, Jian Chen was disappointed in the end. The 100 races did have some trump cards, enough to stop a large-scale invasion from the Tian Yuan continent or the Beast God continent, but they could only be used to deal with Saint Emperors. They were helpless against experts from the origin realm. And they had already used quite a few of these trump cards to fend off the first part of the invasion. Over a dozen forbidden artifacts that had been passed down throughout the ages among each race had been destroyed. Even the treasure of the dwarves, the Heaven's Guard, had been rendered unusable as well. Jian Chen, I feel like this War God Hall can stop origin realm experts, Tai Ta could not help but add when he saw Jian Chen frown. Jian Chen glanced at the majestic War God Hall and asked, Tai Ta, can you refine this divine hall? Tai Ta scratched his head. I can already fuse my soul into the Divine Hall and know everything that happens within it, but I still can't control it. It seems like I can only refine a small fraction of the Divine Hall with my current strength, and it'll only let me expand or shrink the Divine Hall, allowing me to carry it with me like your saint artifact. I still won't be able to use the power of the Divine Hall. I need to fully refine it to do that. Jian Shen did not find his response surprising at all. He knew that the War God Hall was extraordinary, even more powerful than the Supreme Divine Hall in Mercenary City and the one on the Beast God continent. How could an ordinary Saint Emperor control such a powerful Divine Hall so easily? He had even guessed that this Divine Hall did not belong to this world at all and was brought down from the Saint's world by Adriana. Tai Ta, around how long will it take you to refine a small part of this Divine Hall? Jian Shen asked. Tai Ta pondered silently for a while before replying with uncertainty, probably several decades or even over a century. Jian Shen shook his head with a bitter smile. That was just too long. The world of Forsaken Saints would never give them so much time to prepare. Jian Shen bid farewell to Tai Ta and left. He emerged from the War God Hall. He had completed his journey to the Wasteland continent and returned to the Tian Yuan continent. The first thing he did when he returned was visit the Tyrant's Blade School of the 10 Protector clans. When he asked them for the beast fur, the great elders immediately went into their treasury in their ancestral Divine Hall to retrieve it. They were polite and gave it to Jian Shen. Afterward, Jian Shen went to where Mercenary City had once stood. Although Mercenary City had ceased to exist on the continent long ago, the miniature world still remained. The organization had weakened, but they still possessed their deep heritage. Jian Shen asked the Grand Elder of Mercenary City about Great Elder Tian Jian in the miniature world. He learned that Tian Jian was still refining the Supreme Divine Hall of Mercenary City and still had not completed it since he had gone into seclusion. The Grand Elder even took Jian Shen into the miniature world where the Divine Hall was stored. Jian Shen felt that the mysterious power hidden within the structure was extremely energetic and that the Divine Hall gave off a tremendous pressure, filling up the surrounding space. It would cause the surroundings to distort from time to time. Jian Shen gazed at the floating Divine Hall in the distance and sighed inside. When he had heard Tian Jian mention the beast furs in the past, he had also learned that Mercenary City's beast fur was stored in the treasury of the Supreme Divine Hall, and it could only be opened and retrieved by someone who controlled the structure. Looks like I won't be able to retrieve the beast fur in Mercenary City for now, Jian Shen thought and did not stay any longer. He left the miniature world. Afterward, Jian Shen visited the Beast God continent. There were 2 beast furs on the Beast God continent, so if he gathered them, he would have all 18 beast furs except for the one left in Mercenary City. Chapter 1450. Settling down magical beasts. Jian Shen made his way to the Beast God Hall after he arrived on the Beast God continent. Sangxiong personally received him, inviting him into the Beast God Hall. The white tiger remained on the 99th floor of the Divine Hall, still accepting its legacy. The 99th floor seemed like it had entered a whole different space, having been cut off from the world completely. Jian Shen could not sense what was going on inside at all, and whatever was happening inside was not creating any disturbances either. Rum Guinness remained within the Beast God Hall as she eagerly waited for her child to emerge. After learning that Jian Shen had come, she immediately went to greet him. Rum Guinness was grateful toward Jian Shen and had always treated him as her savior. She knew that if it were not for Jian Shen's assistance, her child probably would not have been able to live until now, let alone enter the 99th floor of the Beast God Hall to accept his legacy. The 3 of them conversed a little before Jian Shen approached the main topic. He asked Sangxiong about the 2 other beast furs in the Beast God Hall. Sangxiong understood that Jian Shen wanted to gather the 18 beast furs to remove a seal that the ancient winged tiger god had cast down. Without any hesitation, he immediately made his way into the depths of the 97th floor of the Beast God Hall. When he returned, he held 2 snow-white furs in his hand, to no one's surprise, and said, "There are mysteries hidden within these 2 beast furs. It seems like extremely profound mysteries of the world are hidden within them." All the predecessors of the Beast God Hall have looked at them over the countless years that they've been in our possession and have attempted to understand their mysteries, attempting to use them to surpass Saint Emperor, but no one has ever been able to benefit from the two furs after all these years. During my generation, these two beast furs were kept by Kaiser, Lankiros, and me. We had reached an agreement long ago that each person would hold on to them for 100 years to comprehend them. They have just happened to end up with me this century. The two beast furs have remained in our Beast God Hall for who knows how long, because they're extremely valuable, so they've always been stored in here. All the Saint Emperors who were in possession of these two beast furs had to leave them in the Divine Hall if they ever went out, because only in the Beast God Hall could they never be lost. Since Sovereign Jian Chen needs them now, I'll make the decision to gift them to you. I hope they will help repel the world of forsaken saints in the future. Jian Chen accepted the two beast furs without holding back. He sighed emotionally at how abnormally successful he was at collecting the rest of the beast furs. Afterward, Jian Chen asked Sanxiong for some land where he could let the various magical beasts in the Saint Artifact to settle down. Sanxiong obviously agreed to Jian Chen's tiny request and gave him a few spiritual mountains that belonged to the Tiger clan without any hesitation. He ordered the Tiger clan to move. Although the Tiger clan had the support of Lankiros, the experts of the clan knew that they were approaching their end. Their ruler had tried to harm the young winged tiger god, which was heresy. They would face retribution that could wipe out the entire clan. As a result, the people of the clan voiced no objections to Sanxiong's order. They complied and silently moved their clan. They were extremely cooperative. The Tiger clan only hoped that the winged tiger god would spare their innocent clansmen after it completed its inheritance. Jian Shen arrived at the mountains, where the Tiger clan had once resided, and let out all the magical beasts in the artifact space. An unpredictable change was about to happen to the Saint Artifact, something that could possibly destroy the entire object. It was no longer suitable for magical beasts to live in it. However, the magical beasts had lived in the artifact space for too long. They had already adapted to the environment there, so when they suddenly emerged on the Beast God continent, which was extremely unfamiliar to them, the high-class magical beasts were fine while the weaker ones became troubled. The artifact space was its own world, and its energy was different from the Beast God continent. The relatively stronger magical beasts quickly adapted when they first emerged, but the weaker magical beasts actually suffered from peculiar effects and could no longer cultivate. Many low-class magical beasts were actually unable to absorb the energy of the world, or they would risk blowing up. Jian Chen did nothing after learning this. They needed to conquer this situation themselves. If these magical beasts wanted to continue thriving on the brutal Beast God continent, they would be baptized by many battles. He could only help them so much. Soon after the magical beasts had settled down, the mountains received their first wave of guests. They were members of the Peng clan and the leader was a Class 8 magical beast. He had brought many Class 7 magical beasts in human form with him along with great gifts. They were very polite. Jian Chen did not take part in anything. He observed everything from the peak of a mountain. There had been fighting and slaughter in the artifact space where the magical beasts used to live, but it was nothing compared to the brutality of the Beast God continent. Jian Chen felt slightly guilty given how changes were happening to the Saint Artifact, and he had to move them all onto the brutal Beast God continent. He decided to watch over them for a few days before leaving. After all, many of the magical beasts who lived in the Saint Artifact had treated it as home. The esteemed guests of the Peng clan got along well and befriended the new magical beasts very soon. If an outsider had watched them, they would have believed that they were good friends who had only just been reunited. After learning that the magical beasts had always stayed in the jail-like artifact space, the guests of the Peng clan did not show any prejudice or scorn. Instead, they enthusiastically explained everything about the Beast God continent to them, rambling endlessly. Very soon, a Class 7 magical beast found Jian Chen to vent its grievances. Because they had remained in the artifact space for far too long, some unique abilities of magical beasts had disappeared from them. The magical beasts on the Beast God continent all possessed the ability to devour monster cores and refine the energy within, but they no longer possessed that ability. Jian Chen frowned before gently sighing. There was nothing he could do to help them with these matters. All he could do was tell Sangxiong to secretly take care of them. The new environment of the beast god continent was what truly suited magical beasts. They had existed in the artifact space for too long, and so some of their abilities had changed. They needed to adapt themselves after arriving here. However, to Jian Chen's surprise, 3 Class 8 magical beasts hurried over from different directions and joined the small group. The 3 magical beasts had lived in the artifact space in the past and had broken out with Rui Jin, Hong Lian, and Hei Yu, but had gone their separate ways. Chapter 1451, The Seal Breaks. 1. The magical beasts from the artifact space were familiar with the 3 Class 8 magical beasts because they were their seniors. The Class 8 magical beasts had once been respected and feared, and several Class 7 magical beasts had even gained their protection in the past. After all, there had been around a dozen Class 8 magical beasts in the artifact space. There had been some competitions and enmity between some of them. However, all the high-class magical beasts that had just entered the outside world were extremely excited when the 3 Class 8 magical beasts joined. From the conversations they had had with the Peng clan, they had learned how brutal life was on the beast god continent. Even some of the Class 7 magical beasts would not be able to find a place where they could settle down permanently. However, the situation would be drastically different if they had the protection of 3 powerful Class 8 magical beasts. From then on, the magical beasts from the artifact space all forgot about their past disagreements, as long as their disagreements had not reached a point of no return, and banded together against the foreign world. They formed their own tribe. The 3 Class 8 magical beasts reigned over the tribe, allowing the magical beasts from the artifact space to truly gain stable footing on the beast god continent. They also secretly received care and concern from the Peng clan. As long as Sangxiong was around, no powerful clan would ever show any disrespect to the Peng clan on the beast god continent. After all, the beast god continent was no longer balanced between 3 people. Sangxiong had become the only ruler on the beast god continent after Kaiser and Lankiros had fled. The Peng clan had basically become the imperial clan of the continent. 3 days later, Jian Chen silently left. He left the beast god continent on the Ziying sword, quickly flying over the ocean. This time, he did not travel in the direction of the Tian Yuan continent, the wasteland continent, or the sea realm. He headed toward the Arctic. As soon as he approached the ocean in the north, the temperature plummeted. He was very close to the Arctic and the ice goddess Hull. The sea below was covered with large icebergs. In the distance, the icy tundra of the north was vaguely visible. Jian Chen hovered above the cold sea. The Ziying sword hung in the air, remaining 30 meters long, while shining with a resplendent violet light. Jian Chen sat on it, resting with his eyes closed. The saint artifact let out a faint, golden light as it hovered before him. Most of the seal in the artifact space had already collapsed, and the day when it would be completely eaten away was drawing closer and closer. Strands of radiant Saint Force origin energy that had been accumulated over countless years would drift out from time to time. The seal had already become so damaged that it was unable to keep the origin energy sealed in. Jian Chen silently waited on the Ziying sword. Although his eyes were closed and he seemed like he was cultivating, he was actually devoting his attention to what was happening within the artifact space. 2 hours later, the space 100 meters away from Jian Chen violently distorted. With a gentle bang, there seemed to be something smashing against the space in an extremely brutal method, creating a blurry gate. Soon, a dazzling, golden light poured out and, almost the same instant the light appeared, a tall figure appeared. Tai Ta arrived before Jian Chen in a flash. As he looked at Jian Chen who sat on his sword, he said with his deep, gentle voice, "Jian Chen, I'm here." Jian Chen opened his eyes and stood up on his sword. The Ziying sword immediately transformed into a streak of violet light and shrank to its original size before sticking to Jian Chen's back. Jian Chen hovered high in the air as he looked at Tai Ta. He seemed rather stern, but just when he wanted to say something, the space 100 meters away suddenly twisted once again. 3 space gates formed at almost the same time and Yang Lai, Gui Haidao, and Feng Xiaotian emerged. Feng Xiaotian was no longer a saint king but a saint emperor. He had not reached the peak yet, but that was only a matter of time. The three of them had once reached the origin realm. Even though their strength had fallen and they could not return to the origin realm, they still possessed saint artifacts. Their strength could not be compared to saint emperors. As soon as the three of them appeared, they narrowed their eyes and stared at the space behind Jianchen. A hazy woman, who was basking in a gentle, blue light, silently appeared 30 meters away from Jianchen. She did not give off any presence at all, just like a ghost. The sea goddess had come as well. She was a true origin realm expert as well as the only champion from the ancient times that had managed to survive. The ancient winged tiger god and Mo Tianyun had vanished long ago, so they were labeled as dead by many people. As soon as Tai Ta, Yang Lai, Gui Haidao, Feng Xiaotian, and the sea goddess appeared, all of them became stunned when they saw that several of the most powerful people in the world had arrived beside Jianchen. They had all been invited by Jianchen, but they did not think that Jianchen would invite the other strongest people in the world as well. This piqued their interest. Great-grandson, may I ask you what important matter you need to deal with, which requires you to call us all over, Yang Lai Kai Jianchen. He glanced at the snowy tundra that was barely visible in the distance from time to time. Jianchen clasped his hands at them and said, "Please do not resist, I will take you into the artifact space." With that, Jianchen got the saint artifact to suck everyone into the artifact space. Tai Ta, Yang Lai, Gui Haidao, Feng Xiaotian, the sea goddess, and Jianchen all appeared outside the hall where the seal was stored. As soon as they had appeared, Yang Lai, Gui Haidao, Feng Xiaotian, and the sea goddess discovered that the artifact space was extremely weak, unable to withstand their powers, which had surpassed Saint Emperor, so they immediately concealed their presences. Jianchen brought them into the hall. He said nothing, getting them to personally check the changes occurring to the seal. Tai Ta, Yang Lai, Gui Haidao, Feng Xiaotian, and the sea goddess were all extraordinary people. They discovered the abnormality of the seal very soon and immediately became stern. There's an extremely powerful force in the seal. This space should have collapsed the moment this force appeared, but the force is not destroying this space. Instead, it's using a gentle method to eat away at the seal. This is strange, Gui Haidao said with a heavy heart. This supreme force can easily kill us when we were in our peak condition, so it's definitely not something that Origin Realm experts possess. It's the energy from a godhood expert, at the very least, and one that has reached the upper limits of godhood. Jianchen, have you seen that person in the Ice Goddess Hall? Feng Xiaotian frowned. Besides Tai Ta and Jianchen, everyone narrowed their eyes and stared at Jianchen when that person from the Ice Goddess Hall was mentioned. Jianchen shook his head. I have indeed seen her, but the force in the seal is not left behind by her. Even the artifact spirit does not know where it came from, as if it appeared out of nowhere. My only worry right now is whether or not this force will destroy the Saint artifact and reach the outside world once the seal collapses. That's right. This powerful force even makes me fearful. If it erupted in the outside world, the outcome would be unfathomable, said the sea goddess. Her figure was obscured, but it was possible to tell how stern she was through her voice. Chapter 1452, The Seal Breaks, 2, Jianchen, you got us to come, to have a look at this force, and to try get rid of it? Tai Ta asked. Jianchen nodded. That's right. I've called you all here exactly because of this. Although the force within the seal seems very gentle right now, its power is just shocking. We have to prepare against it. We will need to attack it together if the force becomes violent after it breaks free from the seal and see if we can obliterate it. If that's the case, let's go to outer space. It shouldn't cause too much damage if the force ends up erupting, said the sea goddess. No, I believe this is the best place, Jianchen shook his head. He gazed into the distance. He seemed to be able to see outside the artifact space, looking at the Ice Goddess Hall hidden in the depths of the Arctic. If this matter really develops into the worst possible situation, I believe she will interfere. If she doesn't, the Arctic will probably cease to exist, mumbled Jian Chen. He would not have dared to take this risk if he had not known Protector Shui's exact strength, because he would not have known if she could handle this force. However, his worries completely disappeared after he learned from the greatest God King of the God race, Adriana, that Protector Shui ranked 9th on the God King's throne. If even someone as powerful as her could not deal with the force, nothing would change if he took the artifact deep into space and far from the planet. If this power had completely erupted, the area affected would be so vast that even if it was in outer space, the planet would still be in range. The eruption would lead to a calamity, unless they sent it into deep space. However, they did not have enough time to accomplish that anymore. They waited patiently in the artifact space. Every single one of them was stern and was staring at the force in the seal. They did not leave the artifact space since there was no need to leave the artifact space. The artifact space was not enough to trap them, so if the force completely erupted and destroyed the whole place, they were extremely confident that would be able to leave in time. They waited there for 2 days. Most of the seal had been eaten away by then. A large amount of radiant Saint Force origin energy leaked from the seal as a stream, filling the entire hall. It was like a dense layer of mist, blurring everything in the structure. At this moment, the radiant Saint Force origin energy had reached a shocking density. If a Class 6 or 7 Radiant Saint Master was here, they would definitely go crazy with excitement. The reason why there were so few Class 7 Radiant Saint Masters on the Tianyuan continent was because there was a lack of Radiant Saint Force origin energy. Class 8 Radiant Saint Masters had basically never appeared because of the absence of Radiant Saint Force origin energy. Yet, at this moment, there was far more than a few dozen strands of origin energy. The amount reached into the hundreds, the thousands, or even tens of thousands. If the President of the Union was here, he would have an extremely great chance of breaking through to the 8th class. Jian Chen was also a Class 7 Radiant Saint Master, but he was in no mood to bother with the origin energy of Radiant Saint Force that was drifting through the surroundings. He placed all his attention on the damaged seal. Right now, 2/3 of the seal had already collapsed and the force within would be freed once the remaining 1/3 collapsed. He had no idea what would end up happening. Jian Chen, Tai Ta, Yang Lai, Gui Haidao, Feng Xiaotian, and the sea goddess all held their breaths. They stared at the supreme force within the seal and completely ignored the dense origin energy in the surroundings. They were all in their peak conditions, ready to deal their strongest attack at any moment. 2/3 of the seal had been destroyed. It held on staunchly, but the remaining third collapsed even faster. After just 4 hours, the remaining part of the seal was completely eaten away. The Radiant Saint Force origin energy that had been accumulated over countless years immediately gushed out like a broken dam. It wildly leaked out of the broken seal and, in a moment, the entire hall was filled with a shockingly dense white mist. Visibility became extremely limited, and even with their strength, the 6 of them could not see through the mist formed by the Radiant Saint Force origin energy. Their faces all changed as they uncontrollably staggered a few steps back. They were on guard. Their vision was completely obscured now, so they could only use their other senses to observe the supreme force. The azulate swords had already begun to hover over Jian Chen's head, shining with an azure and violet light. Tai Ta had drawn his golden axe while Yang Lai, Gui Haidao, and Feng Xiaotian had all summoned their saint artifacts. The sea goddess held a trident. However, the power of the weapons were completely hidden to prevent damaging the artifact space. If they needed to, their weapons could instantly erupt with their strongest might, enough to tear the world apart. However, their cautious eyes all lit up very soon, becoming filled with shock. Their vision had been blocked by the Radiant Saint Force origin energy, preventing them from seeing the changes to the Supreme Force, but they could clearly sense that the force was weakening at an unbelievably rapid rate after it had eaten through the seal, like a vigorous young man becoming an old man at death's door. All of them were stunned by the strange changes, including Jian Chen. They had all thought about the situation they would have to face once the seal was broken. Even if the force did not end up erupting after the seal was gone, it should have lingered around at the very least and not weakened at such a rapid rate. What a strange force. It seems to only exist to destroy the seal. Not only has it caused no damage at all, but it's even dispersing by itself after it's eaten through the seal. Yang Lai sighed in surprise as interest filled his eyes. It sure is strange. This force should turn into dense energy of the world after it disperses, but it seems to have vaporized instead. It hasn't left any traces behind, not even some energy of the world, Gui Haidao said as a strange light filled his eyes. Jian Shen was stunned, but his face quickly became filled with excitement. The appearance of the force was strange, and its disappearance was strange as well since it did not leave behind a tremendous amount of energy, but the artifact space had not been destroyed. More importantly, the seal, which existed within the artifact space for a long, long time, had been removed. He could absorb all the radiant Saint Force origin energy that the Saint artifact had refined after all those years as he wished now. Chapter 1453, Class 8 Radiant Saint Master, 1. What makes me most curious is just where did this force come from? And who left it here? The 6 of them discussed these 2 questions. The origins of the force had already become a mystery, one that affected all of them. Just a sliver of the force had shocked them all. They could not imagine what terrifying realm of cultivation the owner of the force had reached. More importantly, just when did the owner leave behind the force? Was it recently, during the ancient times, or was it during the ancient era when history had been erased? Maybe they had even come from the saints' world. But obviously, even after they racked their brains, they were unable to reach a conclusion. The artifact spirit had failed to sense when the force had appeared, which made it even more impossible to determine when it first appeared. I never thought that there would actually be so much radiant Saint Force origin energy sealed in here. Great-grandson, with so much origin energy, it'll just be a matter of time before you reach Class 8 as a Radiant Saint Master, Yang Lai said to Jian Chen. A Class 8 Radiant Saint Master has only ever appeared in the ancient times, and since then, none have ever appeared again. Jian Chen, looks like you'll become the second Class 8 Radiant Saint Master. There's always been a legend regarding Class 8 Radiant Saint Masters on the Tian Yuan continent. It is said that they can revive people who have passed away from old age by using the saint weapons they have left behind. Even I don't know whether this is true or not because the Class 8 Radiant Saint Master in the ancient times never did anything like that. The sea goddess stared at Jian Chen. If Class 8 Radiant Saint Masters really did possess such heaven-defying abilities, Jian Chen would definitely be able to increase the overall strength of the world once he reached the 8th class. Whether it was an emperor armament, a king armament, or a ruler armament, they were all extremely difficult to destroy. After so many years, the Tian Yuan continent has given birth to many saint weapons, which have been left behind by saint rulers, saint kings, and saint emperors. If all the owners of all these weapons were to be revived, it would be an extremely terrifying force. Jian Chen's eyes became filled with eagerness when he thought about that. He could personally test whether or not Class 8 Radiant Saint Masters possessed such great abilities. The force within the seal did not require Protector Shui's assistance since it perfectly reached a resolution, which obviously relieved Jian Chen and the others. All of them soon bid farewell to Jian Chen, and Yang Lai, Gui Haidao, and Feng Xiaotian returned to the Tian Yuan continent. In the blink of an eye, only Jian Chen was left in the cold sky above the sea. He put the saint artifact away and stared at the icy tundra in the distance for a while before leaving. Jian Chen returned to the Tian Yuan continent on his sword and found a desolate mountain. He then entered the artifact space and prepared to go into seclusion. His Radiant Saint Force had once stopped at Class 6 and was unable to reach Class 7 because he lacked Radiant Saint Force origin energy. This was why he had visited the Radiant Saint Master Union in the City of God. Only there would he be able to an opportunity to become a Class 7 Radiant Saint Master. Now, his Radiant Saint Force remained at Class 7. The reason was similar to when he was a Class 6 Radiant Saint Master. He lacked the origin energy of Radiant Saint Force. Not every Radiant Saint Master could reach Class 7 or 8 with Radiant Saint Force origin energy, but without it, it was impossible to reach the 7th class no matter how talented the Radiant Saint Master was, let alone the 8th class. The artifact spirit had reinforced the hall where the seal had been located in the artifact space, completely sealing in all the Radiant Saint Force origin energy so that none of it could leak out. White mist filled the vast hall. It was formed from the pure radiant Saint Force origin energy, and it was so plentiful that it was immeasurable. Jianshen sat in the hall and began absorbing the origin energy. The cultivation process for radiant Saint Masters was vastly different when compared to fighters. Fighters absorbed the energy of the world and used it to condense their radiant Saint Force in their dantian and used it to forge their bodies so that they could obtain strength. Radiant Saint Masters cultivated the soul. They absorbed radiant Saint Force origin energy into their soul to evolve it, refining the origin energy and storing it in their soul. Radiant Saint Masters possessed weak bodies, but they also possessed powerful attacks, Class 7 Radiant Saint Masters in particular. If they used origin energy to cast radiant arts, they would be able to deal attacks on the level of a Saint Ruler. Only Class 7 Radiant Saint Masters could use the Forbidden Arte, God's Descent, which was a powerful technique that could even fend off Saint Kings. It was countless times more powerful than Saint Tier battle skills, but the only drawback was that its price was just too heavy. Jianshen sat in the center of the hall, absorbing the radiant Saint Force origin energy as quickly as he could. Strands of visible, white mist constantly flowed into his forehead, entering his soul before being surrounded by it. He quickly refined these strands. Jianshen's soul had already reached the peak of Saint Emperor now, so it could not be compared to when he had first reached the 7th class. As a result, both his rate of absorption and refinement was extremely great. No other Class 7 Radiant Saint Master could match up to him. His talent as a Radiant Saint Master was extremely impressive as well, so the origin energy was extremely compatible with his soul. As a result, he advanced at an extremely great pace toward the 8th class. If other Class 7 Radiant Saint Masters, while continuously refining origin energy, required 100 years to reach the 8th class, then Jianshen only needed a few years or even less time than that. As the of Radiant Saint Force origin energy merging with Jianshen's soul rapidly increased, he could sense his soul morph bit by bit. Although it remained at the peak level of a Saint Emperor and showed no signs of increasing, it was undergoing a different growth, becoming even more powerful. At the same time, both his rate of absorption and refinement gradually increased as his soul morphed. A small whirlpool, completely condensed from white mist, formed near his forehead, as if there was a suction force between his eyes endlessly pulling in origin energy. Chapter 1454, Class 8 Radiant Saint Master, 2. In the blink of an eye, half a month passed. Because Jianshen's absorption and refinement rates were far greater than ordinary Radiant Saint Master, the progress he made during that time was equivalent to several years or several dozen years of work. The dense, white mist within the sealed hall had become thinner now, allowing some visibility to return. Even though that was the case, Jianshen could only see 10 meters away from him. Jianshen could clearly sense that his soul was much, much more powerful than half a month ago after absorbing so much Radiant Saint Force origin energy. Since he was both a fighter and a Radiant Saint Master, his soul had not yet reached the origin realm, but he could feel that his soul was no weaker than the origin realm. The origin energy that he had been refined had already been condensed into a faint liquid. It had fused with his soul but took up its own region. The ball of liquid was only the size of a thumb, and it frequently changed between a tangible and intangible form. It had not consolidated completely, but it was growing closer to that stage. Jianshen felt that his abilities as a Radiant Saint Master had drastically increased, definitely several dozen times more powerful than they had been in past, but he was still at the 7th class and had not reached the 8th class. I have to reach Class 8 this time, Jianshen thought inside. He had already made up his mind to become a Class 8 Radiant Saint Master. Immediately gritting his teeth, the speed at which he refined the origin energy increased yet again. However, as he rapidly refined the origin energy, Jianshen became even more surprised. He would never have thought that the amount of origin energy required to reach Class 8 would be so terrifying. If it were not for the Saint artifact, there would be no Radiant Saint Force origin energy in this world, so it would probably be impossible for anyone to reach the 8th class in just a few thousand years. Unknowingly, Jianshen had already cultivated in the artifact space for 2 months. The Tianyuan continent was in an uproar in the meantime. The 10 protector clans and mercenary city were working together to inform the entire continent that they were collecting all the ruler armaments, king armaments, and emperor armaments. This did not only happen on the Tian Yuan continent. Even the Sea Realm and the Wasteland continent were given the same orders by the Sea Goddess and the War God. The Beast God continent was no exception either. Sanxiong had passed the same order to the magical beasts, telling them to collect all the saint weapons left on the Beast God continent after human experts had passed away from old age. The magical beasts, the 100 races, and the humans once held enmity for one another since intense battles had occurred long ago. Naturally, some of the saint weapons had ended up in the hands of the magical beasts and the 100 races. The Sea Realm had never been involved in the battles or wars between the continents, but quite a few humans still lived there. If some humans passed away in the Sea Realm from old age, they would obviously leave behind saint weapons. Jian Shen had no idea what was happening as he cultivated in the artifact space. At this moment, he suddenly shuddered. The whirlpool above his forehead suddenly expanded to twice its size. The rate at he was absorbing the origin energy skyrocketed as well, causing all the origin energy in the entire hall to gently pulse. It all surged toward him as if he had summoned them. Jian Chen's soul was undergoing an overwhelming change. It experienced a leap in quality. His powerful soul suddenly condensed into a ball before turning into a small person at a visible rate. His facial features were distinct and actually seemed the same as Jian Chen's actual face. The tiny man was completely condensed from Jian Chen's soul. He was snow-white and let out a faint, white glow, giving off a divine feeling. Near the forehead of the tiny man, an even brighter speck of white light flickered. The light spread throughout Jian Chen's soul, causing the tiny man within his soul to vary in visibility. The white speck was composed of concentrated radiant saint force origin energy. It was filled with a tremendous amounts of origin energy, countless times more powerful than the origin energy used by Class 7 radiant saint masters. Jian Shen slowly opened his eyes and silently sensed the tiny man as well as the speck of white light on the man's forehead. He could not help but feel delighted. He knew that he had finally broken through the 7th class and had reached the mysterious realm of the 8th class as a radiant saint master. At the same time, his soul had grown, breaking through Saint Emperor and truly reaching the level of the origin realm. It was much more powerful than the souls of ordinary origin realm experts as well. The current him did not even need to leave the artifact space to know what was happening outside. Even as he sat there, his soul could envelop a radius of 1,000,000 kilometers of the outside world. The only pity was that a breakthrough for his soul would not significantly increase in his battle prowess. I've reached the 8th class. I wonder if Class 8 Radiant Saint Masters really are as great as the legends, where they can revive the masters of saint weapons, Jian Shen thought to himself. He suddenly felt overwhelmed by an urge to find a saint weapon as soon as possible to see whether this rumor was true or not. Unfortunately, he had yet to grasp the method. Class 7 Radiant Saint Masters required a corresponding method to revive dead people, and a method was probably required by Class 8 Radiant Saint Masters if they wanted to bring back the Masters of Saint Weapons. Jian Shen stood up and looked around the hall. He discovered that not all of the Radiant Saint Force origin energy had been absorbed. There was still a faint layer of mist lingering about. Even though there was not a lot left, there was at least 1,000 strands of origin energy. I'll leave the remaining origin energy to the president of the Radiant Saint Master Union. He's already reached the peak of the 7th class and isn't far from the 8th class. The remaining origin energy should be enough for him to reach the 9th class, Jian Shen thought. The president of the union had been his master in the past. Even though their master-disciple relationship had not been particularly deep, he would still treat his master well. Jian Shen dismissed his thoughts. Just when he was about to leave, he suddenly froze. He looked at the center of the hall, which just happened to be in the center of the sealed region. A head-sized orb gently hovered there. Strands of radiant saint force origin energy surged within the orb, forming a white mist, which obscured it. It seemed just like a ball of white mist, so it was very easy for people to overlook it. Jian Shen's eyes suddenly narrowed the moment he saw the orb. He became surprised and cried out, "This is Chapter 1455, Fortuitous Encounter to Class 9. In a flash, Jianshan crossed several dozen meters like he had teleported, suddenly appearing before the head-sized, white orb. Surprise filled his eyes. They were fixated on the white orb that was obscured by the revolving white mist. Jianshan slowly extended his hand into the hazy mist and touched the orb. At that moment, Jianshan's eyes became extremely bright, and he struggled to contain his excitement. His heart churned. He struggled to maintain his composure. The head-sized orb was completely condensed from radiant Saint Force origin energy. It had already become solid, as tough as a rock, while the origin energy hidden within had reached an extremely terrifying level. Jianshan could even clearly sense that the radiant Saint Force origin energy within the orb was actually much purer than the mist he had absorbed. Jianshan's feelings became indescribable. He had just become a Class 8 Radiant Saint Master and his soul had just reached the origin realm. It was an extremely great harvest for him, yet he had discovered a white orb condensed from even purer Radiant Saint Force origin energy. The amount within was far, far more than what he had absorbed over the past few days. His heart throbbed with joy. He felt like he was dreaming. It was just too good to be true. The artifact spirit had sensed when Jianshan had finished cultivating. The moment he entered the hall to congratulate Jianshan, he suddenly saw the orb in the center of the room. He became stunned as a similar amount of shock flooded his face. It's completely condensed from origin energy. The origin energy within is so tremendous that it's unbelievable. I never thought that there would be so much origin energy within the seal. The artifact spirit could not help but sigh in surprise. He seemed to think of something and immediately congratulated Jianshan. Congratulations, Masters. Congratulations on obtaining this item. If Master absorbs all the origin energy within the orb, there is a great chance you will reach the 9th class. Class 9, Jianshan softly murmured as his eyes glowed even brighter. They were filled with desire and anticipation. There had only ever been one Class 8 Radiant Saint Master throughout the history of the Tianyuan continent. A Class 9 Radiant Saint Master had never appeared. However, Jianshan's gaze returned to how it was before very soon. To him, there was no major difference between Class 8 and 9. He yearned for Class 8 because it was rumored that they could revive saint weapons, and there were many saint weapons that had accumulated over countless years on the Tianyuan continent. If he could revive the masters of all these saint weapons, they would increase the power of the world without a doubt. They would be of great help when fending off the invasion of the foreign world. If Class 8 Radiant Saint Masters were not in possession of this ability, Jianshan would not have desired to reach the 8th class so much. His battle prowess had already reached the origin realm while Class 8 Radiant Saint Masters could only rival Saint Emperors at most. They could only kill Saint Emperors by offering 1,000 years of their life even when using the forbidden arte. He could kill Saint Emperors as easily as squashing ants, so why would he pay up 1,000 years of his life? According to Jianshan's assumptions, Class 9 Radiant Saint Masters were only equivalent to Saint Emperors on the Tianyuan continent. As a result, reaching the 9th class did not mean much at all to Jianshan. Artifact Spirit, do you know what the difference between a Class 8 and a Class 9 Radiant Saint Master is? Jianshan asked. He had heard a little about Class 8 Radiant Saint Masters from rumors, but he knew nothing about Class 9 Radiant Saint Masters. There were no legends on the Tianyuan continent regarding these existences at all. The artifact spirit shook his head. Master, I do not know. I too have never heard anything about a Class 9 Radiant Saint Master. Legend has it that Class 8 Radiant Saint Masters can revive people through saint weapons. Do you know the exact method? Jianshan asked. The artifact spirit hesitated and said, Master, I do know a little. The Class 8 Radiant Saint Master from the ancient times left it here, but it's incomplete. With the incomplete method, it's not enough to revive the masters of saint weapons. Jianshan was disappointed. After a moment of silence, he said, Give it to me. Yes, sir. The artifact spirit gave the incomplete method to Jianshan. He gave Jianshan an extremely old piece of Class 9 magical beast hide. It was filled with words, recording the method to revive the masters of saint weapons. Jian read through it before gently sighing. He silently put the beast hide away. The artifact spirit was right. The method really was incomplete. He would not be able to revive the masters of saint weapons with this incomplete method. I'll temporarily leave this orb of radiant saint force origin energy here. Jian glanced at his chance of reaching the 9th class before leaving the artifact space without any reluctance. Jian put the saint artifact away after arriving in the outside world. He then left on the Ziying sword, appearing as a long streak of light. Along the way, he expanded his soul, instantly enveloping a radius of 1,000,000 kilometers. The area his soul covered did not seem to be his limit either. As his soul continued to expand, the area it covered rapidly increased as well, enveloping a large portion of the Tianyuan continent as well as quite a lot of sea. Jian stood in an extremely remote place, but he could observe the ruins of Mercenary City through the senses of his soul. He could see the Jessen Kingdom, the Changyang clan in Lore City, and everything in Flame City, including the Bright Moon Divine Hall, which stood silently in the back courtyard of the city lord's estate like a palace. The moment Jian soul enveloped the Bright Moon Divine Hall, Fairy Hao Yue opened her eyes. At that moment, her eyes seemed to be able to pierce through space, allowing her gaze to extend indefinitely. It landed on Jian several million kilometers away. "Greetings to you, Fairy Hao Yue," Jian voice seemed to appear out of nowhere as it echoed outside the Divine Hall. It did not penetrate the structure, but Fairy Hao Yue heard it loud and clear. Jian soul was unable to penetrate the Divine Hall, but he could sense a gaze on him that came from the Divine Hall even with the great distance. "Jian, I never thought that you'd break through so quickly again. You have really surprised me," Fairy Hao Yue gently sighed in surprise within the Bright Moon Divine Hall. Her voice was not loud, but it managed to travel several million kilometers and was heard by Jian, as if she was just nearby. "Fairy Hao Yue, you surprise me as well," Jian gently smiled, but he felt secretly shocked. Only now did he discover that Fairy Hao Yue's soul was no weaker than his own. "Jian, please pay a visit to my Bright Moon Divine Hall if you go to Flame City," Fairy Hao Yue nonchalantly requested. "Most definitely," Jian responded before recalling his soul. He ended the conversation he was having with Fairy Hao Yue from several million kilometers away. Chapter 1456, 7 Colors of the Soulcore. 1. The soul of someone from the origin realm really is terrifying. Before I had broken through, my soul could only cover 200,000 to 300,000 kilometers, but now that I have broken through, it suddenly increased by several dozen times the amount before. I can now envelope several million kilometers, which is already most of the Tianyuan continent. Jian gently sighed inside. He would have never imagined that it was possible to hold a conversation across several million kilometers, like what he had just done with Fairy Hao Yue. Even though the difference between Saint Emperor and the origin realm was a single level of cultivation, the difference in actual abilities was overwhelming. Saint Rulers, Saint Kings, and Saint Emperors were all part of sainthood, and surpassing Saint Emperor would be crossing into a whole new realm of cultivation. Although the difference between each cultivation level within sainthood was very large, it was not impossible to make up for the difference using powerful battle skills or with numbers. However, there were no battle skills or any number of people that could make up for the difference between Saint Emperor and the origin realm. All those below Saint Ruler were ants. This was a saying because Saint Rulers comprehended the mysteries of the world and had the power to freeze space. They could immobilize several hundred Heaven Saint Masters in a single moment. As a result, Heaven Saint Masters were unable to threaten Saint Rulers at all. The difference between Saint Emperor and the origin realm was similar. Saint Rulers, Saint Kings, and Saint Emperors all used Saint Force as well as some spatial force. Origin realm experts used origin energy. This was a power that surpassed Saint Force. Jian rode the Ziying sword and found his way using the senses of his soul. He was surrounded by the violet light from the Ziying sword as he tore through the air at an unbelievable speed. He advanced toward the city of God in the Holy Empire. Soon, Jian arrived in the city of God. He did not want to create a disturbance with his arrival, so he entered the city silently. He flickered a few times through the crowd and entered the headquarters of the Radiant Saint Master Union. Even though the security was tight, it was nothing more than a display to Jian Chen. The president of the union and the Grand Elder currently stood on the highest floor in the headquarters. They watched people surge to and fro outside. The two of them were the most respected leaders of the union as well as the two most powerful Class 7 Radiant Saint Masters. However, the president and Grand Elder's face were riddled with worry because of the recent times. They never displayed the easiness that had once filled their faces. The tunnel to the world of Forsaken Saints is rapidly stabilizing. As time goes on, the time of the next wave of the invasion will get closer and closer. We may have had Jian Chen's help, allowing many people to break through and our strength to skyrocket, but I feel like we're still not the foreign world's opponent even with that. Once we are defeated, the president of the union said with a heavy heart. He and the Grand Elder had always been worrying about this problem. The Grand Elder, dressed in white robes, stood beside with his hands behind his back. He stared at the streets in the distance in a trance. After a moment of silence, he produced a long sigh. We may have Origin Realm experts on our side, but there's only so many of them. They are nowhere near enough to rival the world of Forsaken Saints. In the next battle, it'll be very difficult for us to be victorious. Even if our Origin Realm experts can stop the foreign world's Origin Realm experts, we still won't be able to match up to them in a battle with people below the Origin Realm. We can see this from how the world of Forsaken Saints mobilized several hundred Saint Emperors so easily. As it stands right now, unless we have an expert so powerful that he or she can turn the situation around, probably only a Class 8 Radiant Saint Master can make a difference when the next wave of invasions come. It's rumored that Class 8 Radiant Saint Masters can revive the former Masters of Saint Weapons. After all these years on our continent, quite a few Saint Rulers, Saint Kings, and even Saint Emperors have left behind their Saint Weapons after passing away in meditation. If we can revive all of them, they would be an extremely terrifying force, said the president. How difficult would it be to reach Class 8? Your talent's no less than that prodigy from the ancient times, but even with your talent, you've only reached this level after several thousand years of cultivation. Class 8 is still very distant from you. Jian Chen may also be a Radiant Saint Master and his talent is greater than yours, but he hasn't cultivated for 1,000 years. He's still not going to be able to reach the 8th class. The world of Forsaken Saints would never give us 1,000 years to prepare. The Grand Elder sighed. Who said you need 1,000 years to reach the 8th class? A voice suddenly materialized from behind, right after the Grand Elder had finished speaking. The president and Grand Elder froze because of the sudden voice. Their faces drastically changed. They had failed to discover someone entering the room even with their strength. However, the two of them soon realized that the voice was familiar. Their expressions were immediately replaced with jubilance as they both turned around suddenly. They saw Jian Chen standing straight behind them. Turns out it's you. Come in, come in. The Grand Elder smiled from the bottom of his head. He did not behave too politely, welcoming Jian Chen like family. The gaze he sent toward Jian Chen was filled with delight. Even now, the Grand Elder still could not forget the moment he had given Jian Chen that purple medal. Back then, Jian Chen was still very weak, but the Grand Elder saw how extraordinary he was, so he gave him a purple medal. However, what he did not think was that in just a few decades, the pitifully weak fighter would become the sovereign of the Tian Yuan continent. The president smiled at Jian Chen as well. He was filled with emotion. Before him was not only the human sovereign but his disciple as well. Jian Chen, you just said that reaching Class 8 doesn't require thousands of years. May I ask when a Class 7 Radiant Saint Master can reach the 8th class then? With the current situation, a Class 8 Radiant Saint Master is just far too significant to us, the Grand Elder sternly inquired. Jian Chen smiled and did not explain much. He sent the Grand Elder and President into the artifact space. The Grand Elder and President stood within the hall filled with Radiant Saint Force Origin energy in a daze. They did not return to their senses even after a very long time. What they saw around them was Radiant Saint Force Origin energy that had condensed into mist. Even though it was very thin, they still found it extremely shocking in their eyes. Chapter 1457, 7 Colors of the Soulcore, 2. There's actually this much origin energy here. It's absolutely astounding. The origin energy here is enough to create several hundred Class 7 Radiant Saint Masters, the president of the Radiant Saint Master Union emotionally commented. However, the president and Grand Elder became completely stunned at this very moment. Their eyes became as wide as bells and were fixated on something at the center of the room. They had become dazed. A head-sized white orb hovered there. Pure strands of origin energy surged within it, turning into thick mist, which obscured the orb. It would have been very difficult to discover the orb if they had not been looking around carefully. The president and Grand Elder were unable to look away once they had discovered the head-sized orb. They were enraptured. Only a while later did they move their feet with numb faces, subconsciously moving toward the orb. Soon, they slowly extended their trembling hands toward it. The moment they touched the orb, their bodies immediately jerked as they became overwhelmed with shock. The head-sized orb that constantly surged with origin energy was actually completely condensed from Radiant Saint Force origin energy. The amount hidden within it was so tremendous that it was unimaginable. The president and Grand Elder stood there in a daze. Even with their mental fortitude, they were completely speechless from the shock. Only after a while did they finally return to their senses. They both gasped while the gazes used to examine the orb continued to bear some uncontainable shock and disbelief. Jian Chen, are you currently Class 7 or Class 8? The Grand Elder looked at Jian Chen, still shaken. A gleam of light flickered through his eyes. He was filled with great anticipation. Jian Chen smiled mysteriously and raised his right hand. A strand of milky white light suddenly appeared at the tip of his finger. It was not normal Radiant Saint Force but a strand of origin energy. The only difference was that the origin energy Jian Chen had used did not originate from his forehead, it had appeared from his finger. At the same time, the strand of origin energy was just far more powerful than the Radiant Saint Force origin energy used by the President and Grand Elder. The President and Grand Elder's eyes suddenly narrowed. They became fixated on the strand of origin energy on Jian Chen's fingertip. They gradually became overwhelmed with excitement. Class 8. Class 8. This is the origin energy possessed by Class 8 Radiant Saint Masters. The president involuntarily exclaimed as his eyes began to burn with interest. Even the Grand Elder behaved the same. All Class 7 Radiant Saint Masters desired to reach the 8th class before they passed away, just like how Saint Rulers desired to become Saint Kings and how Saint Kings wanted to become Saint Emperors. The only pity was that the world did not possess natural Radiant Saint Force origin energy, so reaching the 8th class was almost impossible. Even in ancient times, only a single Class 8 Radiant Saint Master had appeared, and he had only broken through successfully by using the Saint Artifact. The second Class 8 Radiant Saint Master has finally appeared on the Tian Yuan continent. The Grand Elder sighed emotionally. His eyes were filled with extremely mixed emotions as he gazed at Jian Chen. The Tian Yuan continent had never seen a person who was both a fighter and a Radiant Saint Master, yet not only had the person right before them surpassed Saint Emperor and become the sovereign of the humans, but he had even reached the 8th class with his Radiant Saint Force, becoming the second Class 8 Radiant Saint Master in all of history. Suddenly, the president's face changed. He excitedly asked Jian Chen, since you're a Class 8 Radiant Saint Master now, do you have the power to revive Saint weapons? Jian Chen's face sank, and he gently shook his head. He sighed, a corresponding secret method is required to revive Saint weapons. Although I've obtained a part of it from the artifact space, it's incomplete. It's not enough to revive Saint weapons. President, Grand Elder, does the Union have this secret method? The President and the Grand Elder both sighed. Despair filled their faces. The President said, full of pity, our Union does not have such a powerful secret method, and according to my understanding, that Class 8 Radiant Saint Master in the ancient times could not revive Saint weapons either. It's evident that the great Radiant Saint Master did not possess the complete secret method either. Jian Chen fell silent. He was extremely disappointed. Reaching Class 8 as a Radiant Saint Master did not increase his strength at all. The only attraction that had caught his eye was the ability to revive Saint weapons, yet now, he did not even have the complete method. Reaching Class 8 was basically pointless. Jianshan temporarily left the Saint artifact in the Union and let the President and Grand Elder cultivate inside. He hoped they could reach the 8th class as well. Not only was Class 8 their dream cultivation level, but their lifespans would dramatically increase once they reached it as well. Other than that, Jianshan let the Class 6 Radiant Saint Master he had befriended in the past, Quan Yukai, into the artifact space as well. He even mentioned that the first young lady of the Kara clan, Kara Liwei, would be able to enter the artifact space to cultivate as well. Jianshan only stayed at the Union for a few hours before leaving. He made his way to the Fragrance River outside the city all by himself. He stood by the river and stared blankly at the surface of the water. He could not help but think of everything that had happened in the past. Not only had he experienced an intense battle on Fragrance River, but he had even met Fairy Hao Yue there, allowing his fiancée, Yu, to become her disciple. The Fragrance River carries a period of deep memories. I wonder how much longer this familiar river, these familiar riverbanks, and these boats can last. Jianshan sighed emotionally after a long time. Eventually, he shot into the sky as a violet streak of light, disappearing into the horizon in the blink of an eye. Jianshan returned to Flame City on the Ziying sword. He greeted Yu, Bai Lian, and his old friends before making his way to the back courtyard of the city lord's estate. There were no guards there, only silence. A single divine hall stood there, radiating with a hazy glow, like gentle moonlight. Even the resplendent light from the sun in the sky was unable to obscure the glow. Jianshan has come to visit Fairy Hao Yue. Jianshan stood at the entrance of the Bright Moon Divine Hall and clasped his hands at the structure. Come in. As Fairy Hao Yue's voice rang out, the doors to the Divine Hall slowly sprung open. A cool presence immediately gushed out of the Divine Hall. Jianshan stepped into the Divine Hall with the azulate swords on his back. He reached the top floor of the Grand Hall. It was empty aside from the throne that stood on one end of the room. At this moment, Fairy Hao Yue's illusionary figure silently appeared with a flash of light. She sat on the throne at the end of the room and looked down at Jianshan from above. Her eyes were bright and carried some appreciation for him. Jianshan greets Fairy Hao Yue. Jianshan bowed at her. He did not mind how Fairy Hao Yue sat high above him. He was not even a fraction of her age and she was also the master of his fiancée, Yu. She had also assisted him in the past, trapping the Changyang Protector clan. Thus, he needed to bow when greeting her no matter what. Chapter 1458, 7 Colors of the Soulcore, 3. Fairy Hao Yue sat on the throne at the end of the room. Even though she was just a figure condensed from her soul, she seemed rather dignified as she sat there. Fairy Hao Yue did not stand up. Extending a finger, a powerful force surged from the Divine Hall before condensing into a chair by Jianshan's side. The chair was completely white and glowed with the faint light of the moon. It was completely condensed from energy, but it was tangible and as tough as steel. Jianshan did not hold back and sat down. He calmly gazed at Fairy Hao Yue, who sat above him. Jianshan, do you know why I've told you to come to my Divine Hall? Fairy Hao Yue inquired indifferently. It must be something important for you to tell me to come to your Divine Hall. Please enlighten me as to what it is, Jianshan responded. Fairy Hao Yue stared at him silently for a while before speaking. You've reached Class 8 as a Radiant Saint Master. While there's always been a rumor on the Tianyuan continent that Class 8 Radiant Saint Masters can revive the Masters of Saint weapons who have passed away in meditation, allowing them to roam the world once more, this rumor comes from the ancient times and has never been proven. Even the Class 8 Radiant Saint Master that appeared in the ancient times failed to do something like that. Jianshan thought that Fairy Hao Yue did not believe the rumor. He immediately replied, "You're right. However, Class 8 Radiant Saint Masters really can revive Saint weapons. It's just that it's not enough just by themselves, they need a corresponding secret method, just like how Class 7 Radiant Saint Masters can raise the dead as long as their souls are intact. The reason why the Class 8 Radiant Saint Master in the ancient times could not revive saint weapons was because he did not have the complete secret technique. It's not that the rumor is false. Fairy Hao Yue stared at Jian Chen deeply. She slowly said, Jian Chen, you don't need to explain these things to me. Of course I know that the rumor isn't false. I may not be a Radiant Saint Master, but my understanding of them actually far surpasses yours. Jian Chen's interest was piqued when he heard that. His face immediately became filled with anticipation, and he asked with clasped hands, May I ask why Fairy Hao Yue has suddenly brought up this matter regarding Class 8 Radiant Saint Masters? Jian Chen, you should have guessed part the reason why. Now that you've reached the 8th class, I've called you over to gift you something you need, Fairy Hao Yue said. With a wave of her hand, a scroll made from beast hide immediately flew over from the depths of the divine hall, arriving before Jian Chen. Jian Chen examined the beast hide. It belonged to a Class 5 magical beast and the faint smell of blood still lingered on it. He could tell with a single glance that it had only been removed from a magical beast recently. Jian Chen accepted the scroll floating before him and slowly opened it with some doubt and anticipation. Immediately, a dense wall of characters was presented before Jian Chen. Jian Chen held the scroll open with his hands and immediately began to read the contents. He became shocked after a single glance. He could not contain his excitement and joy. This is actually the method to revive saint weapons, and it's complete. Jian Chen could not help but cry out loud as disbelief flooded his face. Even the great Class 8 Radiant Saint Master from the ancient times did not possess the secret method to revive saint weapons. All he possessed was an incomplete copy. Meanwhile, Fairy Hao Yue, who was clearly born after the ancient times, possessed the complete method that had not even appeared in the ancient times. It was impossible for him to not be shocked. Correct. This is the secret method that reveals how to revive saint weapons. However, it's only of some use here. Fairy Hao Yue gently sighed. Fairy Hao Yue, may I ask where you obtained this secret method? Jian Chen asked. Jian Chen, you already know that I'm not from this world and have reincarnated from the saints' world. My father was the master of the Moon God Hall, and there was a Radiant God King in our Moon God Hall. This is why my understanding of Radiant Saint Masters is far greater than yours, even though I am not one. Class 8 Radiant Saint Masters possess the ability to revive saint weapons, but the revival process isn't as perfect as it's been rumored to be on the Tianyuan continent. You will know the exact reason soon. Jian Chen frowned slightly. He found what Fairy Hao Yue had just said to be rather confusing. Was there some hidden mystery behind the revival of saint weapons? Radiant Saint Masters are not as weak as you've imagined them to be. Their power is displayed later on. In the saints' world, there are very few people who can match up to a Radiant Saint Master if they possess a similar cultivation. Jian Chen, since you've already reached the 8th class, you have to condense a Soulcore. However, this Soulcore will only be in its initial form. Once you reach the 9th class, the Soulcore reach completion and bloom as a flower of 7 colors. You will be able to condense the power of your soul at that time, and once you have that ability, you will have unearthly powers. At that time, you will become a famed expert across an entire plane. As a result, do not forsake your cultivation as a Radiant Saint Master. A Radiant Saint Master may not be as great of a cultivator as the chaotic body at the same level, but it is not much weaker either. Fairy Hao Yue explained in a stern voice. Jian Chen was taken aback when he heard that. He had never imagined that Radiant Saint Masters were actually so powerful. After all, Radiant Saint Masters below the 7th class did not even have the power to protect themselves against fighters. You have now gained the secret method to revive saint weapons. You should go do what you need to do, but reviving saint weapons just as a Class 8 Radiant Saint Master will still be rather arduous. As a result, it's best if you increase your abilities as a Radiant Saint Master. If you can perfect your Soulcore and reach the 9th class, the revival process will become much easier. Thank you for the guidance, Fairy Hao Yue. I will definitely repay your kindness manyfold in the future. Jian Chen bowed to Fairy Hao Yue before leaving the Divine Hall. Jian Chen immediately announced his status as a Class 8 Radiant Saint Master after returning to the city lord's estate. At the same time, he began collecting ruler armaments, king armaments, and emperor armaments from everywhere so that he could immediately prepare for the revival of the former masters, having them help fend off the foreign world. At the same time, Jian Chen felt extremely curious about the unknown mystery hidden behind the revival process. What? The greatest human expert, Sovereign Jian Chen, is actually a Class 8 Radiant Saint Master as well. This is impossible. In all of history, no one has ever been both a fighter and a Radiant Saint Master. Not only has Sovereign Jian Chen surpassed Saint Emperor, but he's even reached Class 8 as a Radiant Saint Master. Is this true? The entire continent was thrown into an uproar as soon as the news was announced. All of them were shocked by Jian Chen's identity as a Class 8 Radiant Saint Master. After all, Class 8 Radiant Saint Masters were even rarer than Origin Realm experts. In ancient times, 4 people existed who had surpassed Saint Emperor, yet there had only been a single Class 8 Radiant Saint Master. Even though the Class 8 Radiant Saint Master's battle prowess was nowhere near as great as an Origin Realm expert, it was still not enough to overshadow the respected status they deserved. They deserved respect because of a rumor from the ancient times on the Tianyuan continent. This rumor stated that Class 8 Radiant Saint Masters had the ability to revive saint weapons, allowing their former masters to roam the earth once more. Chapter 1459, Revival Through Saint Weapons. 1. Not only had the human sovereign's breakthrough to a Class 8 Radiant Saint Master rocked the continent, but the news also reached the Beast God continent, the Sea Realm, and the Wasteland continent as quickly as it could, leading to great uproars among the 3 other races. Everyone discussed the matter of Jian Chen reaching the 8th class with great interest. If Jian Chen was only a Class 7 Radiant Saint Master, his identity as both a Radiant Saint Master and fighter would not have been able to create such a commotion. However, his identity held a whole new significance now that he had reached Class 8. Not only had the rumors about Class 8 Radiant Saint Masters spread across the Tianyuan continent, but a few experts of the 3 others races, as well as a few ancient clans and organizations, had heard them as well. The ability to revive saint weapons was labeled as heaven-defying. Many people believed that if the Tianyuan continent was in possession of a Class 8 Radiant Saint Master, they would definitely become the most powerful among the 4 races. If a Class 8 Radiant Saint Master had appeared on the Tianyuan continent in the past, the magical beasts and the 100 races would have tried to assassinate him regardless of the consequences, because countless saint weapons from sainthood experts had appeared all over the continent. If all the experts of these weapons were revived, the Tianyuan continent would be in possession of a chilling force. At that time, even if the Beast God continent and the Wasteland continent worked together, they would not be the Tianyuan continent's opponent at all. However, the threat of the foreign world had united the 4 races for the first time. Under this situation, not only did the appearance of a Class 8 Radiant Saint Master fail to make the people of the Beast God continent and Wasteland continent worry, but it instead filled them with delight. My clan originally possessed a king armament. It was obtained by one of my clan's ancestors several tens of thousands of years ago, when he fought against a human saint king and took it as a trophy of the battle after he killed the human. It's been stored in my clan's treasury for all these years, but a few months ago, the great war god sent the command to collect all the saint weapons created by human experts, so we handed it over to the war god hall. Otherwise, I could have used this opportunity to trade for some benefits with the human sovereign. An old man, who was part of a large tribe on the Wasteland continent, mumbled to himself after receiving the news. Many people voiced similar thoughts in the Sea Realm. Although these weapons would only remain when sainthood human experts passed away during meditation, there were still a few that had ended up with various organizations in the Sea Realm due to a variety of reasons. A fraction of humans would stay in the Sea Realm and cultivate there until they passed away, so there were quite a few saint weapons left in the Sea Realm, far more than on the Wasteland continent. However, since their great sea goddess had personally issued an order for all the clans and organizations to hand over the saint weapons they had collected, they had all sent them to the sea goddess hall as quickly as they could. No one dared to defy the order. However, it was exactly because of this order that many clans and organizations began to regret handing over their saint weapons. They did not benefit at all by handing them over to the Sea Goddess Hall. The human sovereign Jian Shen had personally given the order to collect saint weapons, so many people immediately began to think about how they could earn a reward if they gave the weapons to Jian Shen. On the Beast God continent, the Tiger clan that had once stood as one of the most powerful clans began to feel regret as well. The current Grand Elder of the clan stood on a mountain as he gazed in the direction of the Beast God Hall. He constantly sighed. No wonder the Peng Emperor commanded the entire Beast God continent to gather the human saint weapons. Turns out he already knew that the human sovereign had become a Class 8 Radiant Saint Master. Sigh, my clan also had a few of these human saint weapons. Just the Emperor armaments numbered 4. They were all trophies of battles from the past, but they've all been collected by the Peng Emperor. If our clan had personally delivered the Emperor armaments to the human sovereign, we could have gotten him to add a few words for us to the Beast God. It wouldn't have been difficult to save our clan from being devastated. Peng Emperor, this might be our only chance at surviving. Are you unwilling to give us a chance like this? The Emperor may have committed heinous crimes, but many of our clansmen are innocent. The Grand Elder was grief-stricken. He also showed vague signs of despair. Even though he knew that the end of the clan would coincide with the day the winged tiger god emerged from seclusion, the clan did not choose to flee. Even if they fled to the ends of the earth, it would be useless against an expert who had surpassed Saint Emperor. Soon after Jian Shen announced the news that he was collecting saint weapons at Flame City, the 10 protector clans and mercenary city all paid him a visit. They all offered up a space ring before leaving, and soon after they left, Sangxiong, Yadrium, and a Saint Emperor Hall Elder of the War God Hall, all came as well. They also offered up a space ring each. Within the space rings were all the saint weapons they had collected from their own territories. They all offered them to Jian Shen without holding back at all. Jian Shen became stunned when he saw how the space rings were filled with so many saint weapons. Soon after, his face was replaced by a smile. He clasped his hands at them and thanked them. After conversing with them a little, he entered a secret room with the space rings and immediately entered seclusion. As Jian Shen sorted through the saint weapons in the space ring, he could not help but gasp, even with his mental fortitude. From all the space rings, just the number of Emperor armaments ranged in the hundreds. There were over 10,000 king armaments while the ruler armaments had exceeded the king armaments by tenfold. There was over 100,000 of them. These saint weapons had been accumulated over several 100,000 years, possibly even over 1,000,000. Although there were many of them, they amounted to a tiny fraction, less than 100th, of all the sainthood experts that the Tian Yuan continent had given birth to. Each protector clan had fused over 100 emperor armaments into their ancestral weapons, and all the former masters of the weapons belonged to their clan. Jian Shen sat down in the secret room. He calmed himself before grabbing a ruler armament. His eyes revealed his eagerness as he mumbled, "Let's try with a ruler armament first and see what the outcome is really like after its master has been revived." Chapter 1460, Revival Through the Saint Weapons, 2. A head-sized luminous pearl was lodged into the roof of the room where Jian Shen had settled down. It gave off a gentle light, which illuminated the room. Jian Shen sat in the center of the secret room. He silently reviewed the method of reviving saint weapons, thinking through every step it involved. He was making the final preparations for the process he was about to undergo. A while later, Jian Shen's eyes suddenly snapped open. They were bright, causing the room to lighten up slightly. He slowly raised his right hand as he stared at the tip of his right index finger. A ball of white light had suddenly appeared there. Although the light was extremely gentle, it illuminated the entire room like sunlight, causing the luminous pearl in the ceiling to darken. This was the origin energy of Radiant Saint Force. Although this energy was stored in the soul, after reaching the 8th class, Jian Shen could use this origin energy as he wished. He could now summon it through his hands. Jian Shen used the Radiant Saint Force origin energy on the tip of his right finger as a pen, slowly drawing complicated and mysterious inscriptions in the air. He moved very slowly, devoting his complete attention to the process. He was afraid that something would go wrong somewhere and lead to failure. the inscription he drew in the air did not disperse. Instead, it lingered, glowing with a faint white light. Each inscription contained a sliver of the origin energy of Radiant Saint Force. Jian Shen drew a total of 36 inscriptions. Each inscription was different and they grouped into a formation in the air. A thin bead of sweat had already appeared on Jian Shen's forehead. Drawing the inscriptions seemed extremely difficult to him. Jian Shen finally let out a breath of relief as he stared at the 36 inscriptions in the air. He thought to himself, every saint weapon contains the souls of their previous masters formed from their 3 vital energies. If I want to revive the saint weapon, I need to awaken the fragile soul in the weapon first. Then I must use a secret method to melt the weapon and use its power to condense a body of energy. That way, the fragile soul within the saint weapon can be revived. If I want to awaken the soul in the saint weapon, I need to send these 36 inscriptions condensed from Radiant Saint Force origin energy into the saint weapon. Condensing these inscriptions is the hardest step according to the method. I never thought I would succeed on my first try. Jian Shen could not help but faintly smile as he stared at the formation he had created from the 36 inscriptions. But, the next moment, his face suddenly froze. The 36 inscriptions rapidly faded in the air, disappearing completely in just a few short seconds. I failed? Jian Shen became stunned before gently sighing. The Radiant Saint Force origin energy within the inscriptions had actually vaporized, making him lose some of the energy. However, he had only lost a sliver of it. It was nothing great to him, a Class 8 Radiant Saint Master. This step really behaves how the secret method recorded it to be. It is far more complicated than it seems. However, why did I fail just then? Jian Shen did not lose heart at all. Instead, he sank into his thoughts and closely examined the reason why he had failed. After that first failure, Jian Shen tried time and time again, ignoring his exhaustion. Condensing the 36 inscriptions was not difficult to him. What he found difficult was how he could not find the reason why the inscriptions would disperse once the formation was created. For a time, even Jian Shen had no idea what was going wrong. In the blink of an eye, 7 days passed. Jian Shen tried time and time again, but the result remained failure after failure. However, he would sink into his thoughts after each failure and search for a reason. Finally, he discovered the reason behind all his failures after 7 days of continuous trial. The formation created by the 36 inscriptions can awaken the fragile soul within the saint weapon. Not only do these inscriptions need to contain Class 8 Radiant Saint Force origin energy, but they also need a sliver of soul and life from the caster. Jian Shen reached an understanding. Without the slightest hesitation, he immediately fused a sliver of his soul into the 36 inscriptions and used the Ziying sword to cut his finger. He let a drop of blood drip out and then split it into 36 portions. This was no ordinary blood. It was blood from the chaotic body. It possessed great pulses of energy and life. Even though it was just a drop of blood, it possessed the power to kill a saint ruler. Jian Shen fused a drop of his blood and a sliver of his soul into the 36 inscriptions, immediately causing them to shine brighter. Their color changed from white to a faint red as they let out a dazzling red light. At that moment, the inscriptions seemed to gain the presence of life. This time, the inscriptions remained and didn't disperse. They created a perfect formation and became whole. Jian Shen's eyes suddenly lit up. With eagerness and excitement, he immediately sent the formation into the ruler armament he had prepared beforehand. As soon as the 36 inscriptions came in contact with the ruler armament, they disappeared. They quickly surrounded the fragile soul within the ruler armament under Jian Shen's control, slowly fusing with it and awakening it. A while later, the fragile soul completely absorbed the 36 inscriptions. The Radiant Saint Force origin energy within the 36 inscriptions awakened and rapidly nourished the sliver of the soul that was left, allowing it to recover very quickly. The droplet of blood gave it life. Jian Shen could clearly sense the changes occurring the fragile soul and the saint weapon. He contained his swelling excitement and continued to use the secret method, condensing the solid weapon into a new ball of pure energy. Whether it was a ruler armament, a king armament, or even an emperor armament. They were all condensed from the saint force that had resided within their owner. What Jian Shen was doing now was returning the saint weapon back to its original shape, condensing a body of energy. Jian Shen did not come across any difficulties with this step, proceeding through everything extremely smoothly. The ruler armament had transformed into a ball of pure energy before morphing into the shape of an old man. The old man's appearance was distinct. Although he was only condensed from energy, he seemed no different than someone with flesh and blood. However, his presence as a saint ruler constantly rushed against the walls of the room, causing the room to shake, while his eyes were in a daze, without any emotions at all. A saint ruler of the 6th heavenly layer. Just as I expected. Although I can revive people through saint weapons, their strength will fall after being revived. It won't be at the 9th heavenly layer, Jian Shen mumbled to himself. He examined the old man before him in interest, failing to contain his joy. This was because it was he who had revived this old man from a saint weapon with his abilities as a Class 8 Radiant Saint Master. However, Jian Shen noticed something wrong with the old man very soon. His dazed and empty gaze did not seem like a normal person at all. No self-awareness, just like a puppet. Jian Shen realized what the problem was very soon. He was immediately surprised and greatly shocked. At the same time, he could sense an extremely familiar presence coming from this old man. It was actually the presence of his blood and soul. Chapter 1461, Class 9 Radiant Saint Master, 1. I used a sliver of my soul and a drop of my blood to awaken the slumbering, fragile soul within the saint weapon, yet the form it takes after it awakens actually bears traces of my presence. It doesn't possess any presence that belongs to itself. Not only does this old man lack a soul, but he lacks self-awareness as well. He seems like a puppet. Did something go wrong during the revival process? Or is this just how a Class 8 Radiant Saint Master revives a saint weapon? When I obtained the complete secret technique from Fairy Hao Yue, she did mention that Class 8 Radiant Saint Masters could perform the revival, but the process would not be as perfect as it was rumored to be on the Tianyuan continent. In other words, a drawback exists in the revival. Is this the drawback? Jian Shen pulled out another saint weapon from his space ring when he reached this conclusion. He decided to find the answer of his question by using this second ruler armament. This was because he was still filled with some hope. It was extremely likely that the first ruler armament had ended up defective because he messed up. Jian Shen was much more familiar with the revival process of the second ruler armament after the experience he had gained from the first one. Very soon, the second ruler armament condensed into a burly, middle-aged man before his eager gaze. In the end, Jian Shen was still disappointed. The middle-aged man was the same as the old man. He lacked self-awareness, and his eyes were empty, without an intelligent light whatsoever. Jian Shen sighed gently. He felt like the situation he was dealing with was rather pitiful. Although he had completed the unprecedented process of reviving people through saint weapons, those who were revived did not possess the self-awareness they once had. As a result, the strength they could display was extremely limited, which was not something he wanted to see. These puppets would probably become his special army, unable to betray him at all, but he would much rather have living people than loyal puppets. This was because the current world needed power far too much. Afterward, Jian Shen studied the two puppets further. He found the advantages and disadvantages of the puppets. To his relief, although the puppets lacked self-awareness, they still possessed some of their former battle experience and did not feel pain, much less fear. Their advantage would become clear once a life-or-death battle occurred. Looks like we can only treat them as weapons in human form, Jian Shen mumbled to himself. The gaze he gave the two puppets was filled with mixed feelings. No one would have ever thought that the people revived through saint weapons would end up like this. Jian Shen dismissed his feelings and immediately began to revive a third saint weapon. Although reviving them into puppets would be disrespecting and committing a sin against the creators, the Tianyuan continent needed power just far too urgently. As a result, Jian Shen disregarded these thoughts during this period of time. In the blink of an eye, 7 days passed. Aside from the two ruler armaments he had revived, Jian Shen had also revived 3 king armaments and an emperor armament. 3 Saint King puppets and a Saint Emperor puppet had appeared in the room. These puppets struggled to maintain their former strength, all losing 3 or 4 heavenly layers. Reviving ruler armaments is not difficult with my powers as a Class 8 Radiant Saint Master. King armaments are a little difficult, and I can just barely manage Emperor armaments. I almost failed during the revival of the Emperor armament just then. If I continue at this rate, I wonder when I'll be able to revive all the saint weapons in the space rings. By then, the world of Forsaken Saints probably would have invaded long ago. Looks like I need to reach the 9th class. Once I break through and become a Class 9 Radiant Saint Master, my Soulcore will be complete and even reviving Emperor armaments will become much easier, thought Jian Shen. He slowly stood up, opened the door to the room, and left. Jian Shen did not take the saint weapon puppets with them. He left them in the room because he felt like their existences should not be known by others. Jian Shen did not disturb Bai Lian and the others as he silently left Flame City. He made his way to the City of God once again and entered the headquarters of the Radiant Saint Master Union. He returned to the artifact space to continue cultivating. Within the artifact space, the Union President, Grand Elder, Quan Yukai, and Kara Liwei all sat in different corners of the hall. The mist-like Radiant Saint Force origin energy was being absorbed by the 4 of them at a visible rate. Their rate of absorption was not as fast as Jian Shen, so the Radiant Saint Force origin energy had not decreased by much after they had cultivated for a dozen days. However, Kara Liwei and Quan Yukai had reached the peak of Class 6 long ago. Although it had only been a few days, Jian Shen could already tell that they were extremely close to breaking through. Although the president of the Union had remained at the peak of the 7th class for several hundreds of years, the disparity between the 7th and 8th class was just far too vast. Even when Jian Shen was absorbing the origin energy, he still needed some time to break through. Jian Shen concealed his presence and silently made his way to the center of the hall. A white orb, completely condensed from Radiant Saint Force origin energy, hovered there. He stared at it for a while before sucking in a deep breath. He sat in the air. He gently pressed his hands against the orb. The origin energy that revolved around the orb began to violently surge. It seemed to be disturbed, approaching Jian Shen's forehead without anyone's control. An invisible whirlpool seemed to have formed in front of Jian Shen's forehead, sucking at the mist and pulling it all in. In the end, it actually formed a white streak that connected the orb to Jian Shen's forehead. At the same time, even the pure origin energy within the white orb began to endlessly surge out. It was all absorbed by Jian Shen like a whale taking in water. The white speck of light in Jian Shen's soul, the Soulcore, began to swell at a gradual rate. The origin energy hidden within it was increasing at all times. Chapter 1462, Class 9 Radiant Saint Master, 2, Time passed silently. In the blink of an eye, half a year passed by. Jian Shen, the President, the Grand Elder, Kara Liwei, and Quan Yukai all devoted themselves to their cultivation. They did not pay attention to what was happening in the outside world. They had all entered a mindless state of cultivation. They all wanted to break through in the shortest amount of time possible and contribute to protecting the world during the next battle. It was completely silent in the artifact space during that period of time. The artifact space had lost its liveliness after Jian Shen chose to resettle all the magical beasts that had lived there before. The roars of beasts, which would ring out from time to time, had disappeared long ago. The entire place sank into a dead silence with a suffocating atmosphere. Compared to the artifact space, the outside world was extremely bustling. During the half a year, where Jian Shen was cultivating, the conversations regarding him never stopped on the Tian Yuan continent, the Beast God continent, the Sea Realm, or the Wasteland continent. Almost all the saint weapons across the 4 races had ended up with Jian Shen, so they obviously all were worried about whether or not Jian Shen could revive the saint weapons. After all, the revival of experts who had been dead for a long time and had only left behind a weapon was still something that many people found unbelievable. This information only came from a rumor that originated during the ancient times, and there were no records of people being revived from saint weapons. Even the only Class 8 Radiant Saint Master in history had failed to revive someone from a saint weapon, so many people still remained skeptical. There were even some people who did not believe that the rumor was true at all. Many people across the 4 races silently waited for Jian Chen's news. They looked forward to when Jian Chen would reappear and answer their questions. It would be fine if saint weapons could not be revived, but if they could, then the power of their world would increase by several-fold without a single doubt. This increase in power would be extremely helpful when fending off the next invasion. The head-sized orb before had already shrunk by a quarter of its original size after half a year of absorption. Jian Chen's Soulcore, which was condensed from Class 8 Radiant Saint Force origin energy, had grown a lot. The origin energy within it was several times denser than when he had first broken through. This was not just an increase in quantity but an increase in quality as well. After all, the origin energy within the orb was much purer than the strands in the air. The President, Grand Elder, Quan Yukai, and Kara Liwei sat in the corners of the room. After half a year of cultivation, over half of the origin energy permeating the hall had been absorbed. They refined the origin energy far slower than Jian Chen. Even the 4 of them combined were not as fast as Jian Chen when he was still a Class 7 Radiant Saint Master. At this moment, the president of the Radiant Saint Master Union began to shine bright. An extremely dense white light expanded from his head, enveloping him in a single instance. This was a sign that he was about to break through to the 8th class. The president had finally reached the 8th class as he had always dreamed. All the Radiant Saint Force origin energy he had accumulated throughout his life and had absorbed from the artifact space surged wildly into his soul. It gathered at a single point before condensing into a tiny soul core. The president roused from his cultivation soon after his soul core had been condensed. The moment he opened his eyes, his appearance changed as well. Even though he was still an old man who seemed to be in his 70s, his face was ruddy and filled with energy. An obvious amount of wrinkles also vanished from his face. The withering life within his body suddenly began to bubble again. The president's face was filled with excitement and joy. He had waited for this day for just far too long. He had worked arduously for over 2,000 years just to reach the 8th class. Not only did becoming a Class 8 Radiant Saint Master mean attaining the president's greatest wish, but it also meant an increased lifespan. Class 7 Radiant Saint Masters were akin to saint rulers. They could live 3,000 years while Class 8 Radiant Saint Masters possessed the same lifespan as a Saint King. He was still the president of an entire union after all, so he quickly calmed down. He looked around and discovered Jian Chen cultivating in the center of the room with a single glance. His eyes suddenly narrowed. Jian Chen's already become a Class 8 Radiant Saint Master, but he's absorbing the pure origin energy there. Does he plan on reaching the 9th class in a single stroke? The president thought and immediately gasped. His eyes soon began to shine brighter as he looked at Jian Chen in anticipation. Class 9 Radiant Saint Masters have never appeared in the history of the Tian Yuan continent. Even I, the president of the Radiant Saint Master Union, have no idea what a Class 9 Radiant Saint Master is like. Is Jian Chen planning on becoming a legend as a Radiant Saint Master? The president suddenly found that his heart had begun to thump uncontrollably. He did not leave and sat back down where he was. His eyes lit up as he stared at Jian Chen. He wanted to witness the birth of a legend, the legend of a Class 9 Radiant Saint Master. In the blink of an eye, another half a year passed. Quan Yukai and Kara Liwei both successfully reached the 7th class, but they did not leave either. They sat there silently, just like the president, staring at Jian Chen. They wanted to see whether he could reach the 9th class as well. Kara Liwei was several hundreds years old, but she looked like a woman in her 20s. She was noble, refined, and beautiful. As she stared at Jian Chen's handsome, refined face, she fell into a daze. Complicated emotions filled her eyes along with respect and admiration. Very soon, another half a year passed. The Grand Elder had successfully reached the 8th class as well. When he learned that Jian Chen was attempting a breakthrough to the 9th class, he did not leave either and stayed behind. Even the artifact spirit had come, sitting silently at the main entrance of the hall. Jian Chen had already been cultivating for 1.5 years in the artifact space, and the orb was less than a third of its original size. When he had cultivated for exactly 2 years, the artifact spirit, who was sitting at the entrance, suddenly opened his eyes. At the same time, the president and Grand Elder's eyes narrowed. The next moment, an extremely powerful pressure suddenly radiated from Jian Chen's body. It was a pressure that originated from the soul. The president, Grand Elder, artifact spirit, Kara Wei, and Quan Yukai immediately revealed a different expression and left the hall in a hurry, traveling far away from Jian Chen. To their shock, they found that their souls trembled before the pressure. Not only had the pressure suppressed them to the point that they could not move, but they even felt like their souls were about to collapse, as if just the pressure would be enough to squash their souls if they continued to endure it. If it became slightly stronger, they would have ended up dead. Is this the pressure of an Origin Realm expert or the pressure of a Class 9 Radiant Saint Master? The president cried out uncontrollably as shock filled his eyes. Before he could finish what he was saying, a dazzling light exploded from Jian Chen's body. The light was no longer gentle, now filled with brutality. It outshone the sun as it endlessly stretched into the distance. At that moment, the entire artifact spirit had become enveloped by the light. Kara Wei and Quan Yukai could not help but grunt painfully. The two of them closed their eyes in a hurry and covered them soon after. A streak of blood flowed slowly, barely visible between their fingers. The Grand Elder and President closed their eyes as well. As they rapidly retreated, they used their hands to cover their eyes, but there was also some red between the cracks of their fingers. When the light appeared, the artifact spirit grew faint before quickly consolidating again. He immediately stared at Jian Chen in shock before vanishing with a flash. He had traveled far away from Jian Chen. Chapter 1463, Class 9 Radiant Saint Master, 3, What's this? Has something gone wrong with Jian Chen's cultivation? Quan Yukai backed off hurriedly as he loudly asked a question. His voice was filled with worry. That light is Radiant Saint Force Origin energy, but it's normally always gentle. Why has it become brutal all of a sudden? Has Jian Chen successfully become a Class 9 Radiant Saint Master? The president asked with a deep voice. His face was filling with shock. A Class 9 Radiant Saint Master. A Class 9 Radiant Saint Master. They've never appeared in all of history. Am I going to witness the birth of a legend today? Is the difference between Class 8 and 9 this brutal origin energy? The Grand Elder murmured. He was excited and his voice was trembling. At this moment, the four of them dared not to open their eyes. They all used their hands to cover their eyes to block the sharp light. Even though two of them were Class 8 Radiant Saint Masters, equivalent to Saint Kings on the Tianyuan continent, they still did not look at the light with their naked eyes. Not only was this light brighter than the sun and could cause drastic injuries to the eyes, but the light could attack their souls as well. It could injure their souls by seeping through their eyes. Even though they had covered their eyes, they still felt like their hands, faces, and even bodies were being stabbed at by something small and sharp, as if the light had turned into countless needles. Although it was not enough to injure the four of them, the unexpected change still shocked them. After all, they were Radiant Saint Masters and had cultivated for many years. They understood Radiant Saint Force extremely well. They would never have thought that Radiant Saint Force could contain such a surprising might. The pressure from Jian Chen grew stronger and stronger. The Soulcore in his soul had grown by a lot, passing the initial phase of completion. However, his Soulcore was still not perfect, but at this moment, his Soulcore let out a great brilliance. The light passed through his body and appeared like a miniature sun, illuminating the entire artifact space. Although the light was Radiant Saint Force Origin energy, it was no longer gentle. It was brutal. Meanwhile, the Soulcore gradually fused with his soul. This fusion was a true fusion where the two combined into one. As they fused, Jian Chen's soul rapidly grew. It made a leap in power as the pressure he gave off, which affected the souls of people, rapidly increased. The president, Grand Elder, Quan Yukai, and Kara Liwei backed off time and time again, now several dozen kilometers away from where Jianchen was. Only there could they endure the pressure emanating from Jianchen. The artifact spirit had already disappeared long ago and had not appeared since. Jianchen's fusion between soul and Soulcore lasted for 3 whole days. The light from Jianchen's body gradually disappeared after that, and the pressure vanished as well. Jianchen remained seated where he was. He silently sensed the changes that had occurred. The first thing he noticed was what had happened to his soul. Before he had reached the 8th class, his soul had still been at the peak of Saint Emperor, and after breaking through, he had stepped into the origin realm. Yet now, his soul had powered up after becoming a Class 9 Radiant Saint Master with the fusion between his soul core and soul. It had become several times more powerful than before. At this moment, the President, Grand Elder, Quan Yukai, and Kara Liwei all returned to the hall from several dozen kilometers away. They gathered in the hall once again and all stared at Jianchen. There was some dried traces of blood lingering at the corner of their eyes. Their eyes were all slightly bloodshot, while Quan Yukai and Kara Liwei were particularly affected. Their eyes seemed scarlet. The artifact spirit silently appeared as well. He stood with the 4 of them as they all gazed at Jianchen. His face was filled with caution, as if he was prepared to flee if Jianchen began to shine again. He was a spirit, so the white light, which could directly attack a soul, was extremely harmful to him. The light would affect him more than it would impact Kara Liwei and Quan Yukai. Jianchen finally opened his eyes. The breakthrough this time was different. He had not been able to contain his excitement when he had reached the 8th class, but he was extremely calm after breaking through to the 9th class. Jianchen, have you broken through successfully? Quan Yukai could not help but ask. Even though he already knew the answer to the question, he wanted confirmation from Jianchen. Jianchen nodded with a smile. As he gazed at their bloodshot eyes, he obviously knew that they had become that way because of him. He immediately felt apologetic inside, and a powerful white light emerged from him, enveloping the 4 of them. This white light was bright, but it was extremely gentle, unlike the brutal light from before, which had been filled with offensive powers. The 4 of them immediately felt a comfortable feeling well up in every corner of their body, coming from the gentle, white light. Their bodies felt light and at ease, as if their constitutions had been modified. The bloodshot redness in their eyes vanished in a short moment. Their eyes were completely healed. Very soon, the white light disappeared. However, to their shock, their constitution had changed slightly in just that short moment. It was like a person with an ordinary talent had consumed a 1,000-year-old heavenly resource, modifying their constitution for the better. The 4 of them became extremely shocked when they discovered this change. Even the President and Grand Elder struggled to remain calm. They had already guessed that a Class 9 Radiant Saint Master would be very powerful, but they had never imagined that their power would be so great that they could modify the constitution of people in just a short moment. I've purified your bodies with a strand of Class 9 origin energy, assisting you by laying down your future path. Cultivation will be all the more easy now, Jianchen said. After he had completed his soul core and completely fused it with his soul, he seemed to have opened a new gate. He understood many things now, and his control and usage of Radiant Saint Force origin energy had reached a whole new level. The President and Grand Elder simultaneously gasped. They stared at Jianchen with mixed feelings. A Class 9 Radiant Saint Master had never appeared throughout the history of the Tianyuan continent, yet this level had been attained by the young man right before them. This filled them with indescribable feelings. Chapter 1464, Martial's Soul Force. 1. Jianchen removed some ruler armaments and king armaments from his space ring and gave them to the Grand Elder and President. He also told them about the method of reviving the saint weapons as well as the experience he had gained from his attempts. Now that both the President and Grand Elder had reached the 8th class, they possessed the ability to revive saint weapons. The pressure on Jian Chen would be reduced with their help. At the very least, they would save a lot of time. What they lacked most was time, seeing how the next wave of the invasion from the foreign world could come at any moment. The President and Grand Elder accepted the beast hide that recorded the method of revival like it was a treasure. They held it carefully in their hands as joy filled their hearts. Quan Yukai and Kara Liwei enviously stood on one side. They also felt the urge to reach Class 8. After a moment of hesitance because Jian Chen was taking in the Grand Elder and President's excited faces, he revealed the secret of the puppets to them so that they could prepare themselves mentally. Their reactions were just as Jian Chen had expected. They became stunned. Jian Chen did not give them any time to react, leaving the artifact space with a wave of his hand. The four of them had been sent out as well. When the President, Grand Elder, Kara Liwei, and Quan Yukai returned to the Union headquarters, Jian Chen was already gone. He had left first. Kara Liwei and Quan Yukai were dejected since they wanted to thank him. Jian Chen visited Lore City first and sent his mother into the artifact space. The white orb had not been completely absorbed by Jian Chen. It was egg-sized now. Mother, cultivate without worrying in here. Here is an orb condensed from Radiant Saint Force origin energy. If you can absorb all of it, you may not reach the 8th class, but there is more than enough to reach the 7th class, Jian Chen softly said to Bai Yuntian before passing the solid orb to her. Bai Yuntian was over 50 years old but only seemed to be in her 20s or 30s. She wore a luxurious white dress and a snow-white cloak on her back. She seemed graceful and kind. Bai Yuntian immediately looked at the egg-sized orb that was constantly emitting strands of origin energy. Curiosity filled her eyes before she carefully accepted it. She examined it closely and asked, Xianger, is this origin energy of Radiant Saint Force? The origin energy of Radiant Saint Force was a power that only Class 7 Radiant Saint Masters could possess. Although Bai Yuntian had seen it before because of her special status, this was the first time she could sense the mysteries of the power at such a close range. Correct, this is Radiant Saint Force origin energy, but it's much purer than ordinary origin energy. Class 6 Radiant Saint Masters only need to fuse a strand of it into their soul and their souls will morph, allowing them to step into the 7th class. Their souls will condense and will be unbound from the body, just like saint rulers. Mother, you may not have reached the peak of the 6th class and are unable to fuse a strand of origin energy, but the Radiant Saint Force in the artifact space is many times denser than the outside world. If you keep the orb near you, you will cultivate even faster. You'll be able to reach the peak of the 6th class quickly, and at that time, you'll be able to absorb the origin energy within the orb to reach the 7th class, said Jian Chen. Class 7, Bai Yuntian murmured. Her eyes were filled with excitement and anticipation, but she calmed down. She looked at Jian Chen lovingly and gently said, Xianger, I'm already very satisfied and proud of you being able to reach such heights. Becoming a Class 7 Radiant Saint Master is no longer important to me. You should keep this orb with you. You need it more than me. Bai Yuntian passed the orb back to Jian Chen. Jian Chen gently shook his head and smiled, Mother, I've already reached the 9th class. This orb is no longer any use to me, so just keep it. Take it and cultivate at ease here so that you can become a Class 7 sooner. What? You're already a Class 9. Bai Yuntian was immediately shocked when she heard that Jian Chen had already reached the 9th class. She stared at him in amazement. Disbelief was written all across her face. Just like that, Bai Yuntian temporarily settled down in the artifact space. She did what Jian Chen wanted her to do, cultivate and work toward becoming a Class 7 Radiant Saint Master. Jian Chen left the artifact space after having settled this matter with his mother. The tower-like saint artifact immediately shot into Jian Chen's forehead and disappeared. Jian Chen returned to Flame City. When he was about to enter the same secret room to revive Emperor armaments, he suddenly heard Fairy Hao Yue's voice. Jian Chen, please come to me, Bright Moon Divine Hall. Jian Chen was taken aback, but without any hesitation, he entered the back courtyard of the city lord's estate in just a few flashes. He arrived before the entrance of the Divine Hall. The entrance opened automatically and Jian Chen stepped inside. He disappeared very quickly into the divine hall. He found Fairy Hao Yue in the same hall he had met her in before. She sat on a high throne as an illusionary figure, looking down on Jian Chen who sat below. Her gaze seemed to be able to pierce everything. She stared at Jian Chen closely, as if she could see everything inside and outside him. Fairy Hao Yue sighed in surprise after some time. She said, "I never thought that you would become a Class 9 Radiant Saint Master so soon. This is something I must congratulate you on accomplishing. If you hadn't advanced as a Radiant Saint Master, your soul would still be at the level of a Saint Emperor." The complete Soulcore at Class 9 just happens to be at the same level as your soul, which is why the two could fuse perfectly, allowing your peak Saint Emperor's soul to reach its current power at early returnance. You must be able to refine Martial's soul force now. Jian Chen was shocked after listening to her. Only now did he understand why his Soulcore and soul had fused so perfectly. As it turned out, it was because his Class 9 Soulcore was the same level as his peak Saint Emperor soul. The two of them could only meld together perfectly when they were at the same level. Although his soul had stepped into the origin realm when he had reached the 8th class, that was because of his incomplete Soulcore. If he did not create a Soulcore, his soul would have remained at the peak of Saint Emperor. The two of them would never have properly fused together. "Fairy Hao Yue, may I ask you what Martial's soul force is?" Jian Chen asked while modestly clasped hands. Although Fairy Hao Yue was not a Radiant Saint Master, her understanding of Radiant Saint Masters was enough for her to guide him, a Class 9 Radiant Saint Master. Chapter 1465, Martial's Soul Force, 2. Martial's Soul Force is a power that emerges once the Soulcore fuses with the soul. It's not something that can be possessed by people who are not both fighters and Radiant Saint Masters. Martial's soul force will radiate uncontrollably when the Soulcore and soul fuses together. You've undergone that process already, so I think you understand what this Martial's soul force is a little, explained Fairy Hao Yue. A gleam of light flashed through Jian Chen's eyes. He asked, "Is this Martial's soul force a type of pressure that targets the soul?" Martial's soul force is an extremely wondrous power. Through my understanding, it is similar to soul attacks and specializes in harming the souls of others, but it is far more terrifying than ordinary soul attacks. However, since there are far too few cultivators who are both fighters and Radiant Saint Masters in the Saints' world, even I have not personally seen people use it. I've only heard of them, so my knowledge regarding Martial's soul force is limited. If you want to understand it in further detail, you can only investigate it yourself. But I once heard a rumor that a single over-god, who was both a fighter and a Radiant Saint Master, managed to slay several hundred gods in a single moment and heavily injure over 10 other over-gods with Martial's soul force alone. 2 of these over-gods even ranked within the top 3,000 on the over-gods plaque. You should know how powerful Martial's soul force is now. Fairy Hao Yue closely observed Jian Chen. Jian Chen was shocked. It was not rare for a single person to take on many others on the same cultivation level. He could do it right now. However, to heavily injure them in a single moment and kill several hundred people who were only one cultivation level lower was far too shocking. After all, the time taken was just far too short. At the very least, when he had first forged the Azulate swords, he had claimed that he was invincible among Saint Emperors and could take on Origin Realm experts, but he definitely would not have been able to kill several hundred Saint Kings and over 10 Saint Emperors in a single moment. Jian Chen's breathing became rather ragged. He became extremely excited and was in shock thinking about how powerful Martial's soul force was. If he possessed this ability and the astonishing battle prowess of that over-god mentioned by Fairy Hao Yue, he would not need to fear the invasion of the world of Forsaken Saints even if the invasion force possessed an absolute advantage with regards to the number of Saint Emperors and even Origin Realm experts that would come. According to the glorious battle record of that over-god from the Saints' world and with Jian Chen's soul now at the Returnance realm, he would be satisfied with the ability to heavily injured Receival experts, not even Returnance experts. At the same time, it was extremely likely that he could kill Saint Emperors like how that over-god had killed gods, ending the lives of hundreds in a single moment. Martial soul force is very powerful. Even the Saint's world has publicly recognized it, which is why those who are both Radiant Saint Masters and fighters are known to be impossible to fight. Only the prodigies groomed by a few large organizations have the right to stand up to them in battle. However, there are very few people who can use martial soul force. With my estimation, it would be difficult for you to find even 10 people who can use it across the entire Saint's world. Fairy Hao Yue fell silent for a while. She then gazed at Jian Chen and continued, "There's one more thing. Throughout the countless years that the Saint's world has been around, I have never heard of a user of martial soul force who has reached the level of Grand Prime." Jian Chen was unaffected by this revelation. His face did not change because it was impossible to break through to Grand Prime. He practiced the chaotic body. In the history of the Immortals world, no one had reached Immortal Exalt with the chaotic body either. Seeing no response from Jian Chen, Fairy Hao Yue thought he did not know what a Grand Prime was, so she said, "Jian Chen, you're now in possession of strength in the Origin Realm, so it's time for you to understand a little of the basic information regarding the higher world. The cultivation realms in the Saint's world are split into 5 major realms: Mortal Realm, Sainthood, Origin Realm, Godhood, and Primordial Realm. The Mortal Realm corresponds to those below Saint Ruler on the Tian Yuan continent. Sainthood is Saint Ruler, Saint King, and Emperor, while the Origin Realm is Receival, Returnance, and Reciprocity. Your current strength is in the Origin Realm, but I am not sure how to rank you with the cultivation method you practice. It's very difficult for me to determine your exact strength. The only thing I can determine is that your soul has already reached the level of Returnance. Beyond the Origin Realm is Godhood. It has 4 minor cultivation realms: Deity, God, Over-God, and God-King. Beyond that is the final major realm of cultivation, the Primordial Realm. The Primordial Realm is split into 3 minor cultivation realms: Infinite Primes, Chaotic Primes, and Grand Primes. Grand Primes are peak existences in the Saint's world. The status they hold there is equivalent to Saint Emperors on the Tian Yuan continent. They are the strongest in the higher world and have reached the end of the path of cultivation. Jian Chen, you are destined to never reach the apex as both a fighter and Radiant Saint Master. If you go to the Saint's world in the future, even if you devote your entire life to cultivation, you will never be able to hold a supreme status like on the Tian Yuan continent, regardless of how shocking your talent is. Do you not feel disappointed because of that? Jian Chen smiled at ease. "Fairy Hao Yue, I'm still far from godhood, so isn't Grand Prime just too distant for me right now? And I've never purposefully pursued status throughout my life, let alone care about it. In the past, I only worked hard to live. My goal was to not be felled by the blade of my enemies, as well as to gain enough strength to protect my friends and family." Fairy Hao Yue wanted to praise him. It's best if you can maintain a mindset like that. However, your talent is so great that you could even be ranked among the prodigies groomed by large clans. Even if you can't become a Grand Prime in the future, you can reign supreme below Grand Prime and still dominate. I thank you for your praise. Jian Chen clasped his hands with a smile. Alright, Jian Chen. I haven't called you over to only tell you about martial soul force. Even I've never seen it before, so the main reason I called you here is to personally witness the wonders of martial soul force and see whether it's as powerful as it's rumored to be, Fairy Hao Yue said. I will demonstrate martial soul force since you want to see it. However, as I am unfamiliar with it, I may not be able to control it, so please be careful, Fairy Hao Yue, said Jian Chen. Fairy Hao Yue snickered. I may only be a soul now, but I'm not something you'll be able to harm within this divine hall. Chapter 1466, Sparring with Fairy Hao Yue. Jian Chen said nothing more. He slowly closed his eyes. Martial soul force was only a name from the Saint's world. To Jian Chen, this so-called martial soul force was only the power of his soul. It was the power of his new soul, which had perfectly fused the soul of a fighter and the Soulcore of a Radiant Saint Master. This was akin to Yin and Yang Qi. Once they fused, they would change and create chaos. A while later, Jian Chen's eyes suddenly snapped open. At that moment, his gaze became extremely shocking. A tremendous pressure radiated from him, surging into the surroundings like a storm. The pressure targeted the soul. A devastating force seemed to permeate the pressure. Once people with weaker souls were enveloped by the pressure, their souls would be crushed to pieces in a single moment. A gleam of light flashed through Fairy Hao Yue's eyes. Her illusionary body radiated clear moonlight as a blurry, full moon slowly rose behind her, shining bright. Fairy Hao Yue just happened to stand in the center of the moon. Her hair swayed and clothes fluttered despite the still air. She seemed like a goddess under the moonlight, dignified and sacred. At the same time, the supreme power hidden within the divine hall began to secretly move. It rapidly surged, forming a transparent barrier of moonlight between Jian Chen and Fairy Hao Yue. It seemed to cut the hall into two regions. As soon as the barrier formed, Jian Chen's martial soul force gushed forward. In a single moment, the invisible force viciously smashed against the barrier, but to Jian Chen's surprise, the martial soul force passed through the barrier as soon as it came in contact with it. Like a wild horse, it charged toward Fairy Hao Yue, who sat on the throne. The barrier she had cast failed to stop it. It was like the barrier did not exist at all. The rumors are indeed real. Martial soul force is extremely difficult to stop and ordinary methods are useless against it, Fairy Hao Yue murmured as she sat still on the throne. She soon opened her arms, and immediately, the full moon behind her grew brighter. It erupted with powerful moonlight force, enveloping a region with a radius of 20 meters. The region had become an independent domain, a world of its own. Separate laws seemed to exist within the region. Jian Chen's martial soul force passed through the moonlight barrier and smashed into Fairy Hao Yue's domain. It caused the domain to shake violently as the laws were thrown into chaos. It showed signs of collapsing. Fairy Hao Yue narrowed her eyes. The next moment, the moonlight force from the full moon behind her grew stronger, pouring even more power into the domain and strengthening it just as it was about to collapse. The domain rapidly stabilized and stopped the martial soul force. Seeing how his martial soul force had been stopped and could not shake the moonlight force around Fairy Hao Yue, Jian Chen's eyes immediately narrowed, and at the same time, he lowered his guard. He no longer needed to worry about the martial soul force injuring Fairy Hao Yue. Since my martial soul force cannot harm Fairy Hao Yue, why don't I stop holding back and use my full power to see what level my martial soul force has reached and whether or not it can be used to deal with returnance experts. At the same time, I can start to understand this new power, Jian Chen thought. He immediately stopped holding back and began using the martial soul force with all he had. Immediately, the pressure in the hall skyrocketed, especially the region where Fairy Hao Yue was. The pressure condensed there was so powerful that even receival experts would end up paling. If Saint Emperors entered that region, they would not be able to last more than 10 seconds before their souls collapsed. They would end up dead. This was because this pressure was an attack using martial soul force, one that targeted the soul. However, Fairy Hao Yue sat there steadily, facing an attack that could easily kill a Saint Emperor. The domain around her automatically strengthened and remained steady, withstanding the storm like barrage. No matter how Jian Chen increased his martial soul force, he was not able to shake her domain at all. This stalemate lasted for several seconds. Jian Chen ran out of steam first and needed to stop. He recalled his martial soul force. He discovered that using it as an attack took an extremely heavy toll on his soul. For the short moment he had used it against Fairy Hao Yue, he had expended over 60% of the power in his soul, which Jian Chen found unbelievable. After all, his soul had now reached the returnance realm. It was no longer a peak Saint Emperor soul like before. Jian Chen stopped and the moonlight force around Fairy Hao Yue disappeared as well. Very soon, the hall fell quiet again. Fairy Hao Yue sat on the throne without any changes appearing on her face. Jian Chen, who sat below, seemed rather exhausted. This martial soul force really is wondrous. In the saints' world, many people have only heard of this power because almost no one can use it. I never thought that I'd experience this fortuitous encounter by falling to a lower world and witness the legendary martial soul force. Fairy Hao Yue sighed emotionally. The gaze she used on Jian Chen became rather complicated. She knew that from now on, there would be one more person who could use martial soul force in the saint's world. Jian Chen gently sighed and bitterly smiled. Is there any need for you to praise martial soul force so much? In my opinion, martial soul force is wondrous, but it's only so special. Even you can shrug it off so easily. You're wrong. Jian Chen, there are 2 reasons why martial soul force is unable to harm me. One reason is that you do not know how to use it properly. There are corresponding methods and techniques for using it, and only with those methods and techniques can you push its power to its limits. Secondly, I use my domain. As long as my domain does not fall, nothing can work against me. Even soul attacks are useless. I may just be a soul now and need to use the Divine Hall's power to cast my domain, but I can take on returnance experts within my hall, Fairy Hao Yue nonchalantly explained. Jian Chen finally understood. He knew that Fairy Hao Yue had only been a Saint Emperor when she had had a body and had not broken through to the origin realm, which was why her body had fallen apart after her lifespan of 10,000 years came to an end. Only her soul remained, but she was still from the Saint's world after all. Her comprehension of the mysteries of the world were far beyond Saint Emperor and even beyond the origin realm. Even though she only possessed the cultivation level of a Saint Emperor, her battle prowess was on a whole different scale. No one visited the extremely distant moon that appeared every night, even during ancient times when Saint Emperors were common. Only Fairy Hao Yue had been there before and collected materials from it to construct the Bright Moon Divine Hall. This ability was more than enough to showcase how extraordinary Fairy Hao Yue was. You're tuning in to the Biyao's Wuxia Chronicles YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.